we might make a start. We have a full house for who's coming in person. Well, welcome to the 26th session of the Research Advisory Board for the IPHC. We have, I think, 9 in person and potentially 4 RAB members online. We already have 2. And 2 others are meant to be connecting as well. And so the only apologies we have at the moment are from Grace Hallen, who's out catching the last of her quota before she wraps up the season. So I think we have a few new faces, so I think it would be useful if we quickly go around the room and just introduce yourself, obviously your name and where you're fishing and or processing or what your sector is. If we could do the board first, and then we'll jump to the Secretariat staff as well. So do you want to start, Alex? Yep. Oh.
I'm Kevin Bennett. I'm out of Newport and salmon troller.
Yeah, Lando out of Kimasu, out of Kodiak, commercial fishing, sort of.
Jim Hubbard from Seward, Alaska, and halibut and blackcod commercial.
I'm Bruce Hale. I'm a Canadian processor and done a little bit of charter work on the Star Wars.
Scott Mazzoni. I work for Quinault Indian Nation and manage about 7 to 10 tribal boats for halibut in Area 2A.
Sean McManus, been long lining for halibut and blackcod for the past 30 years.
I'm Jason Roberts, commercial sector out of Canada.
Steve Daniels. I've been fishing commercially for halibut for about 40 some years, and last 25 years have a fishing lodge in Pelican, Alaska.
Alex, halibut out of Homer, Alaska.
And online, board members, if you could just introduce yourself just to confirm that you're available and your microphone's working. So maybe Angus, if you can just test your microphone and introduce.
Hey, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, no problem.
Okay, yeah, Angus Grout, commercial halibut fisherman from 2B for the last 30 years.
Great. I also see Brian.
Good morning, this is Brian. I've got charter boats in Homer, been charter fishing for 10 or 11 years now. Been a RAB member for a while, and I also sit on the North Pacific Fisheries Management Council.
Fantastic. Lauren? Keep trying there, Lauren. See if your microphone can be switched on.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Awesome.
Too easy. Tiara. Your microphone came on for just a moment there. You would try again, Tiara? Looks like we're having trouble with receiving your audio, Tiara. If I could just ask the tech team to reach out to Tiara and see if you can get that connection working and microphone so that she'll be able to engage throughout the meeting, that'd be great. I did also see Grace pop up for just a moment, so she's obviously trying to connect, which is great. She's not there at the moment, but as soon as she connects, we'll let her and again, Tara, introduce yourselves. Myself, David Wilson, the Executive Director, been here almost 10 years now, and it's a pleasure with Giuseppe co-chairing the Research Advisory Board, and so we're really looking forward to some productive and helpful discussions throughout the course of the next day and a half or so.
Good morning, everybody. It's great to see you here, and we really appreciate your participation in the meeting, especially those two new RAB members. You're welcome. And also all 5 that are participating online. We appreciate your time and effort and participating in this really important meeting for us. So we really look forward to hearing what you have to say and how you can participate in our IPHC process. Thank you very much.
Okay, let's go around the Secretariat. If you could just introduce yourself. So maybe Ian, start with Ian, and then we'll just go all the way around.
Good morning, Ian Stewart. Been here a while, and I think this is one of the most important meetings of the year because it's a chance for the staff to do more listening than talking. So I hope that you all speak up because we really appreciate hearing from you at this meeting.
Good morning, Tyler Jack, Fishery Independent Setline Survey. Hi, Colin Jones. I'm a life history biologist here, focusing on reproductive biology right now.
Hello, Rachel. I'm also on the Fishery Independent Setline Survey team.
Hello, Kayla Walesi. I'm the Setline Survey Coordinator. And we also have Kevin Cole over here on the wall, who is also part of the Fishery Independent Setline Survey.
Good morning, Basha Utniczak. I'm a Fisheries Regulations and Data Services Branch Manager.
I'm Andy Jasanowicz. I'm a research biologist, and my work focuses on using genetic tools to better understand population structure.
I'm Claude Dykstra. I'm a research biologist here on the biological ecosystem team. Work mostly on discard mortality and whale depredation issues currently.
All right, and then in the back of the room, Alan Hicks, quantitative scientist working on management strategy evaluation and harvest strategy policy.
And Ray Webster, another quantitative scientist. Thank you.
Introduce yourself and Alex as well. Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. I've never used one of these. Is this how you do it? I'm Ann Beaudreau. I'm on the faculty of the School of Marine Affairs at UW. And for 10 years before that, I was in Juneau at University of Alaska. And William will introduce himself in a moment, but William's a student of mine, and we're really interested in how fishermen and fishing communities participate in management and have their knowledge and voices brought into the process. And so with Alan, we developed this collaboration. We're in the very early stages, and we're really interested in learning from all of you on what you like about this process, how it informs decision-making, and we're also learning from the MSAB as well, and kind of see this as a way of maybe an example that other management bodies could draw from. So we're just here to listen and learn, and turn it over to you, William.
Yes, hi. I'm William Lay. I'm a student under Ann at the School of Marine Affairs at University of Washington. Like Ann mentioned, the goal of this project that I'm assisting in researching is about characterizing stakeholder involvement in fisheries management. So thank you for having us.
I'd like to mention that William was a former IPHC intern 2 years ago, and we really appreciated his time with us. So good to see you back, William.
Okay, well, that's all the introductions, but we will just go back quickly. And Tiara, can you try your microphone again, just to see if we can hear you?
Hi there, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Perfect.
Excellent. Sorry about that. Yeah, my name is Tiara Boys. I'm a Canadian commercial halibut fisherman who's been working out on the boat for 20 plus years.
Perfect. Well, welcome. As I mentioned, we did see Grace Allen pop up on the screen for a short moment. So when she joins, we'll let you all know whether she's going to be able to join the meeting or we'll just read the report. Okay, well, let's bring up the agenda if we may. And before we go in and adopt the agenda, I just want to remind everybody what the purpose of this meeting is. And so I am just going to, because we have a couple of new board members, just read through what the IPHC rules of procedure state for the Research Advisory Board. So in essence, the RAB is composed of members of the Pacific halibut community, and the two core objectives for having this meeting and the input into the process is firstly to suggest research topics to be considered for incorporation into our integrated research and monitoring activities. And so we want to hear feedback on each of the projects that you're going to hear some of the preliminary results on, but then also to discuss potential new ideas on projects moving forward and what we could be looking at considering, whether it's trying to find research funding or utilizing the Commission's direct contracting party contributions to undertake applied research here at the Commission. And as part of that, part two is just to provide the Secretariat with direct feedback, direct input and advice from industry perspective, from your perspective on those current and planned research activities. In addition to that, the RAB is also able to suggest direct recommendations to the Scientific Review Board for their consideration, particularly if it relates to some of the more detailed activities that we undertake, whether it be our monitoring activities or our specific stock assessment and fishery independent set line survey activities as well. So that's it in a nutshell. That said, as for those who are returning RAB members, you're very familiar that this is a casual meeting. We do try and just have a free-flowing discussion. There will be a couple of short presentations for you, but the majority of the day and a half is really about discussion. And so we really want to hear from you about your thoughts, not only about what's been happening on the water and on the docks this season, but also in terms of some of the potentially the biological interactions, ecosystem dynamics that you're experiencing out in the field. So with that said, if anybody has any suggested edits or amendments to the agenda. And so very quickly, we're just going to step through some quick updates on what's been happening at the Commission. We will then have our usual RAB member input and sort of season overview. We'll touch base very briefly on the integrated research and monitoring activities of the Commission in terms of the revision of the plan moving forward. Before Dr. Planas and his team will really step you through some of the description of the current research activities that he and his team have been undertaking. We'll then have a bit of a discussion about some of the other monitoring activities, so the fishery dependent and fishery independent data activities, primarily from Kayla and her team to hear about what's been happening on the water with the fishery independent set line survey this season, but then also from Dr. Webster in terms of what's going to be planned from a design perspective and being put forward to the Commission at the upcoming interim meeting and annual meeting for adoption for that FIS footprint for the next 2 to 3 years or so. Then the rest of the agenda is pretty flexible, and we'll have a bit of a social gathering this evening just up the road. And then come back tomorrow morning and have a free-flowing discussion with no specific presentations planned tomorrow. And Giuseppe's going to facilitate that interactive discussion about ideas for research and monitoring at the Commission. And then you'll all be free to head off to the Fish Expo, so I'm sure we'll see some of you there. But with that said, any amendments or suggested changes to the agenda before we adopt it? Not seeing any. It's a bit hard to monitor online as well. Quickly just see if there's any hands up. Nope, not seeing any. So let's consider the agenda adopted, and then we can just bring up the first paper as part of agenda item 3, the IPHC process. And this relates to the actions arising from the previous Research Advisory Board meeting. So this is the standard paper 03 that we prepare and provide as a reference for you. And it just encapsulates all of the recommendations and requests for action from the RAB to the Commission and the Secretariat last year. We do try as much as possible to make sure that these requests for action have a specific action to be undertaken, who has the responsibility, whether it's the Secretariat, other stakeholders or the Commission, and a desired timeline for delivery. And those requests and recommendations are provided at Appendix A. I don't intend on going through these in detail because you're going to hear specific updates from Dr. Planas and his team on all of the research recommendations. But I will just note that of the 3 recommendations for action, the only one that's still in progress is related to whale depredation mitigation strategies. And you're also going to hear a bit of an update from the team probably later this morning. In terms of the 7 requests, there are 2 remaining or 2 in progress, and I'll just focus on those. The first was for the RAB had requested that the Secretariat collect information on possible conditions that could lead to the observed increased prevalence of sand fleas. I don't think there's been a great deal of work undertaken at this point in time, but again, Josep, I'll just pass to you to give a quick update.
Yeah, thank you, Dave. Yeah, there's really not a whole lot of literature on amphipod, basically sand flea intrusion, particularly for Pacific halibut out there. There's a report that was published in 1987 from DFO on parasites of fishes of Canada. That's probably the largest and most comprehensive description of potential parasites that that affect the Pacific halibut fishery. But there's very little, really very little data on, for instance, what kind of environments are most prone to having sand fleas. Obviously, sand bottom, but the environmental conditions that lead to abundance of sand fleas that can affect the Pacific halibut fishery are really not well understood. So we've done a considerable search of literature on the topic and found very little, unfortunately. So one thing that would probably be interesting is to maybe increase our efforts to document spatial presence of sand fleas and try to maybe incorporate that data into potential maps. That's probably the direction that we probably want to go. So documenting the spatial and temporal occurrences of sand fleas in the Pacific halibut fishery in a much better way, in a more comprehensive way. So in terms of data that we can show, really very little, because there's very little out there so far. But we'll keep working on it. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. There was a request to continue investigations on Pacific halibut juvenile stages. In fact, that's the work that that William Lay started here at the Commission 2 years ago during his internship. So the work that he was doing was to look at fairly comprehensive abundance and distribution information on juvenile Pacific halibut in the Gulf of Alaska. So to be honest, we really haven't had the chance to continue that work in detail. There's this project is still obviously open. Unfortunately, we've been busy with other projects and we haven't had the manpower to put a lot of effort into that. But that is something that I think would be extremely beneficial for us to have a more comprehensive information on juvenile habitat and link that to adult habitat. So this is a work still in progress. Thank you.
Any questions for Giuseppe on those 2? Yeah, go ahead, Sean.
In regards to the sand flea issue, some might argue that there's increased sand fleas where there's been heavy trawl activity. So can you do a study where there's similar bottom in areas where there's no trawl or restricted trawl versus similar bottom in areas where there's heavy trawl?
Well, that's something that we should definitely take into consideration when we document the presence of sand fleas. So that's the documentation. I think in that sense will be important, and documenting whether that happens in areas with previous trawling activity, basically steering the bottom and that affecting the sand flea abundance. So that's a well point. Thanks.
I'll add that as one of those actions that we can continue to try and monitor and document.
When you turn in your fish, you do the report. I don't recollect there's being a sand flea or an interaction, sort of a section of that. Would that be something that could be added to your end of trip reports without a lot of problem?
Do you mean the Fishery Independent Set Line Survey? Yeah.
Even just the commercial. When you turn in your fish, you have to, you go in front, the halibut guy shows up and you go, well, I was in this area. We set this much gear, this depth, this bait. Did you have interactions with orcas? Did you have interactions with sand fleas?
That's a good question. There is an area on the logs that you can provide that additional information, but it's not currently required. Basha, could I just talk to you a little bit about that, or ask you to speak to it rather, because you are currently looking at amending the logs, and just provide an indication of how that currently occurs and what options there would be.
Certainly. So on the logs, there's a section where comments are allowed. So that's a place where people can or fishermen can always add any additional information, and we do collect that and transcribe it. But this will be very unstructured type of data to use. If we were to have the data collected in a structured format, that would have to be added to a specific field where this could be reported by set, but that would require preparing, revising the logbooks, and probably a regulatory proposal to require that information. Otherwise, if it's the quality of the data, if it's optional, it's not going to be comprehensive, and that's going to lead to risk for bias in providing any feedback based on that data.
Yeah, roger that. Understood. It just seems like add another line. You guys are talking about reformatting or redoing the logs anyway. This would be perhaps a good time to, hey, rather than make it an option, say, did you have any interactions? I mean, it's a lot easier if you call it out rather than say it's optional. Because if it's optional, you're just going to go, let's go. We're delivering fish. I got things to do.
Yeah, in Canada, it's mandatory. Yeah, because we have 100% monitoring. So if you release a halibut that's licensed, you have to report that it's licensed. So in our logs, everything that's licensed is recorded as licensed.
Yeah, I think it'd be almost better if the port samplers would ask the questions too, because we have, once we start using groundfish logbooks, we have to use that book even for halibut. So the halibut logbook wouldn't fit the bill. So I think most of us have pretty good relationship with port samplers too, but I'd like to see more discussion on this later, actually. I know Bruce made a comment to me. It's got my head turning and thinking. So I'd like to later on, if we could.
I'd also like to add we have sand flea data on all of our halibut that come up in this survey. So it would be really easy. I think we have years and years of data on sand flea occurrence, and I think that would be easy to tie back into areas and yeah, for years. So that should be easy enough.
I'll just add that indeed for the data we do receive from DFO summary of the licensed fish mortality. So that's something that we could work with DFO to summarize for at least 2B. I'll note that at least for the logbooks, there's a difference between changes that we can make to the IPHC logbook versus we do authorize reporting Pacific halibut in NOAA logbook, where it would not be so straightforward to request NOAA to add this type of information to their logbook. But if that was a RAB's request, we could certainly work with our field staff to ask them to collect some of that additional information and try to summarize that for Research Advisory Board. So I suggest in this case that would be something that would come as a request, and we can work with our port operations.
I think it's a good path forward, and noting the request to add this to our discussions later, either this afternoon or tomorrow. Let's keep thinking about that and try and flesh it out as a clear action and path forward, and what you would like requested in terms of summaries of what's happening in 2B, what's happening from FIS data, and then also what could potentially happen as part of commercial logbook data. So let's flesh that out either this afternoon or tomorrow, and include something clear in the report as well. That'd be great.
Is it okay if I chime in a little bit?
Yeah, thanks, and apologies for not seeing your hand.
No problem. Yeah, I'd just like to echo what Sean said. We noticed a big uptick in areas where we had our catcher, processor, trawlers working, whether that's just the sheer amount of offal that went over the side, but at the 800 line specifically, there never used to be lice issues, and there is now. And the turbot fleet was working there for a few years. They're gone now, but yeah, that's definitely something we've noticed down 2B.
Great, thanks very much. And we're just going to have exactly the tech team come in and make sure we can turn up that audio. Could you just repeat yourself? Apologies about that, Angus.
No problem. How's that? Any better there?
A little better, and we'll also get the sound turned up. But if you can just speak a little bit louder for us for the moment. Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I was just saying we've noticed that in 2B a real increase in the lice in areas where we've had catcher, processor, trawlers working, such as the 800 line. Never used to be lice there, and then there was a significant turbot fleet that was working there for many years, and there's lice there now. So I just wanted to echo what Sean had said, and we've noticed the same thing in 2B.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. That's very helpful. Any other comments on those three actions that are still in progress before we move on? If not, then I'll just again reiterate that the remaining seven recommendations and requests have all been completed, and you're going to receive detailed feedback on those throughout the course of the meeting. So just sit tight for those. Okay, well, that ends that paper. If we could just have paper 04 brought up as well, please. Okay, so paper 04 is our standard outcomes of the most recent session of the commission meeting itself. Similar style as the one you've just seen on outcomes from the RAB. And so provided at Appendix A, and I'm just going to scroll through the cover page, which just lists everything that the commission discussed of relevance to the RAB. But in Appendix A are those specific requests for action. And so I don't intend on going through these in detail, but I will highlight a couple of them. First and foremost, it's great that we've been able to fulfill the Commission's request to add some additional Canadian members on the Research Advisory Board. So thanks very much, Jason and Bruce in particular. In terms of port operations, the Commission had requested that there be an annual compilation of comments received by our field staff, our fisheries data specialists, on current harvest conditions. And so this is something at the recent work meeting we were discussing with the Commission. We hadn't received too much at this point, but what it involves is our fisheries data specialists in each port, when they interact with processors or fishers who land their catch, just to talk about what's happening on the water. Similar to what we're going to do in just a moment with all of you, but just to try and get that finger on the pulse of what's happening throughout the fishing period. And so you will see that as a summary incorporated with the paper from Monica and her team, which is going to be presented at the interim meeting as sort of a reference paper at this point, and then a full presentation at the upcoming commission meeting. So something just to be aware of. It's similar to what we're about to do in the next agenda item for the RAB. In terms of request 3, this was something that was just updated during the meeting and specifically related to directed discard mortality. Basha, do you just want to give a quick overview of what that concern was and how it was addressed during the meeting?
Sorry, I was looking at the different document. The fisheries data overview paper normally includes information about the discard mortality and observer programs that are in different countries and applicable to different regulatory areas. So the paper included some of the outdated information at the time. So upon discussion with the Commission, we updated the information in the fisheries overview data using the latest information from the NOAA Observer Report. And we agreed with NOAA Fisheries to keep the fisheries data overview paper up to date, always with the Observer Report to report most recent changes to the observer program's coverage. So if you look at the interim meeting document and fisheries data overview paper, that paper is now updated using the 2025 observer report that includes a summary of data up to 2024. So you can see that update there. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you very much. The next one also was actioned and will be presented as an information paper 02 for the upcoming interim meeting. And this is the request that's been circulating primarily through the Canadian industry for the Secretariat to prepare an analysis detailing biological, logistical, and socioeconomic effects of a potential year-round fishing period in Canada. And so this is something that's been discussed for a number of years, and it finally made it to a formal request from the Commission to the Secretariat to undertake this work. And you will see that as information paper 02, and it's already been posted on the interim meeting webpage. Basha, is there anything you'd like to add on that in particular?
So I would just like to add, as a part of this project, we source a lot of supplementary data from DFO, and that includes more detailed statistics on discards and mortality of fish of Pacific halibut, subject to quota deductions in other fisheries, not just directed Pacific halibut fisheries, but also other fisheries. So that paper includes analysis looking at if the winter fishery was allowed, what additional mortality we're talking about. So really focusing on really additional data that provides, just additional information, what it would mean if the fishery was open for that just limited scope winter fishery where those discards are not required to be, or those fish that are not required to be discarded but could be retained during the winter season.
Any questions on those before I move on? Sorry, I'm just going to keep looking online as well. I have to change my screen to get there. Nope, nothing. Okay, the next action, or it's just an agreement from the Commission, which was great. It was an agreement from the Commission that even though they were looking at rationalizing some of our budget and the contracting party contributions to the Secretariat to undertake our work, they did agree with the recommendation coming from the Secretariat not to make further reductions in sampling in our ports. And so if you cast your mind back over the years, the Commission has at times eliminated a port. For example, a couple of years ago, we didn't sample in Juneau. We didn't put a fisheries data specialist in Juneau. And as part of the budget review process, they were looking at making additional cuts. But the Commission agreed not to do that moving forward, which is a good win for us. The only other action sort of coming from the Commission related to the Fishery Independent Setline Survey, and primarily around the FIS priorities. And so if you cast your mind back, the Fishery Independent Setline Survey operated with 3 priorities, a primary, secondary, and tertiary. And the Commission has agreed at the most recent meeting to move away from revenue neutrality as a target, as our secondary objective. And so they now have a new secondary objective for the Fishery Independent Setline Survey, and that being simply to have cost effectiveness without compromising the scientific integrity of the FIS design. So that's, again, a good change for the Commission. It allows us to do two things. First of all, to shy away from catching fish to make revenue, to earn revenue rather, and therefore apply it to the next year's Fishery Independent Setline Survey. It also allows us to target and for the contracting parties to seek additional funding from other sources for the Fishery Independent Setline Survey. We've set an aspirational target or a reserve of $2 million for the Fishery Independent Setline Survey. Last year, we received a little over 600,000 in voluntary contributions from both contracting parties for the FIS, and this year, the US has provided already $513,000 for the 2026 Fishery Independent Setline Survey, which is, as you'll see a little bit later from Dr. Webster, much needed given the cost of the Fishery Independent Setline Survey and some of the other challenges that we've been having in terms of making it cost effective. So a good win there. That's really it from the Commission meeting itself. Any questions on any of those actions arising from AM 101? Not seeing any in the room or online. Let's wrap that agenda item up. And could you just go back to the agenda, please? Okay. All right. Well, that's enough from us for a little while. The next agenda item, number 4, is just about that season overview from RAB members. And so at this point, for the new RAB members, what we do is we just go around the table and each member just talks about your season, your year so far. What are some of the ups and downs? What you've noticed is changing, whether there's anything that's just routine, it's just continuing on. The intention there is to provide a sort of a loose record in the report for the Commission to be aware of what the RAB members' concerns are, or just your perspective of what's been happening on the water and in ports coastwide. So do we have a request? Alex or Lando, do you want to go first, seeing as though you're on the ends? Lando, perfect.
Well, I had a pretty good year, I think. I only fish a couple of months in the spring and a month or so in the fall, in between the survey season. And so sand fleas are friggin' everywhere. And so I have my spots. They're not secret spots. I go to them in the spring. And usually I don't have a lot of company. Most people aren't starting that early, for one. But I've noticed here the last few years that there's always boats there. Usually after my first trip or something. And I thought maybe it was just a coincidence or something, but I don't know. Maybe it's the AIS tracking app everybody has now that you can see where all the boats are, and then they can compare the deliveries to, blah, blah, blah. So that's probably just me being paranoid. So subsequently, I tried a bunch of new spots this year, and I found fish everywhere. I found a whole bunch of little fish everywhere. Everywhere I went, I mean, even during the survey, I think your data probably bears that out. There was just a lot of undersized illegal fish. And then the sand fleas. And, you say, well, the sand fleas are in muddy bottom or in sandy bottom or something. No, they're everywhere. And even areas that I fished before and knew about that never had sand fleas before have them, or have some of them. And you can get away with fishing around sand fleas if you use a real short soak, supposedly, but I don't know. It just seems like out west in the Gulf, I don't fish a lot in the far eastern Gulf, but during the survey this year I did, and we had sand fleas everywhere. I mean, on every set almost. And some were worse for mortality than others, but still. And so, yeah, I fished a bunch of new areas and was encouraged by finding decent fishing in just about every place I went. And then out west, we have some 4A quota out there. Went to that spot that I normally scratch up my little 15,000 or so, and there was like 8 boats. And the weather had something to do with that. So I went on a little jaunt around the islands there and found some pretty good fish. And I think a lot of it was really lucky that I didn't have whale interaction. There's usually a lot more orca action down toward Four Mountains than I ran into. And then the survey, we did a little bit of your 4A survey this year, and we were really lucky in that regard too, that we caught a lot more fish than you projected, but we didn't see much whale activity. And of course the price was real good, and that helped. But yeah, I'm encouraged. I think there's a lot of recruitment happening, and yeah, it's encouraging, I think.
Sure. It's also an opportunity for anybody to interact and ask more questions. So feel free to sort of grill each other on any of those points. Go ahead, Steve.
Down in 2A, for the salmon trollers, that kind of mirror what Lando just said. We saw an abundance of undersized U-32s, a lot of juvenile halibut being caught by the salmon trollers. In interaction and talking with the commercial halibut fishermen, one of the biggest concerns going on, I think they had 3 openers this year down in the 2A. First opener was pretty dismal. Their catch rate was really poor, and they were having a lot of conflict with the drag boats and the shrimp boats during actively fishing through their sets. And again, just a little teaser, I'd like to, in the proposal part of our meeting, talk more about some data mining that should be free to take the AIS information and the landing reports from the drag industry and the shrimp boats and correlate that to see if it's conflicting with the halibut openers in the predominant areas of our area. I think that has a revenue effect on the commission because less catch, less assessment for our research study. So their first opener was pretty dismal. There was a lot of fish caught on the second and third one. Thus, I think that's why they had 3 openers this year. And I might be in error on how many openers there were, but the catch rate was dismal the first. Didn't hear a whole lot of complaining on the second or third, a lot of large fish being caught. So.
Go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, I think what I experienced would pretty well mirror what Lando was talking about. We fished 3A, 3B, but I'm also traveling other areas and fishing blackcod in those areas too. So we see, like, for example, Chatham Strait in the fall. That's a deep water fish radar. We didn't see the halibut down deep that we normally see there, but we've been seeing that decline a little bit. But I think that's year class related because that's bigger fish that we're seeing in the deep there. But I think Lando hit something with that AIS because I shut my outgoing signal off. I still shut it off. But
foil over his head.
the other thing I found out too is I had a couple guys tell me that they figured out what my AIS beacons on the flagpoles, because I don't have the boat name on those, but they figured out what are my numbers. So I'm not using those anymore either. Because, well, it's frustrating when it's foggy because it takes a little more time to find them. But there's a lot of fishermen I think are using the AIS to look around. So anyway, it was a little that's frustrating. But I was like Lando. I checked out other ground, and it wasn't outstanding, but I was encouraged. And I don't know. I think we had about 40 in 3A and 30 or whatever in 3B. In 3B, I was concerned about, I wanted to get that in one trip. And I was a little concerned about that, but we did pull it off. But that one day, you know, you get in that sequence where you get maybe 3.5 to 4,500 a day, and then you get that day that only gives you 1,200. And that, you know, scares you, especially when you only got a couple days to get it done in. But then we picked right back up again. So that it was and that still bothers me because that particular spot has been really consistent. And I don't, maybe somebody had been there, or I have no way of knowing, because I move every day and check around, because I like to see things, check out the ground at the same time. I was there in July. And I work mainly on the mainland. I stay off the edge because I just don't want to cycle through all the baby halibut. And there's a lot of little ones on the edge. We did see a lot of recruitment, and a couple of the charter guys I talked to in 3A, they were talking about that as well. A lot of recruitment, it's undersized, you know, that 20. I know we saw a lot of 30 to 31 and a halves, and then we'd see about 16 to 20 inchers. And the charter guys were seeing that as well. So, but we fish shallow and we fish deep both. And I don't know. I was encouraged after what because I think it was a little bit of an uptick over the year before, I think. But the recruitment part was probably the most positive thing that I saw.
Everybody I talked to that fished 3B early was really struggling.
Yeah. Right. But I think it picked up a little bit. But I think the other thing too is the quotas got so low that a lot of guys only have a couple thousand pounds. So like the Russian guys, they were banding together, and instead of a boat going out with a crew, they're going out with 2 or 3 skippers on board. And you know how that can work too. So, but they would run together like that, and then to catch 4,000 or 5,000 pounds, because that's all between 3 guys, that's all they had to catch. So, and that impacts our decisions too, because you're trying to, maybe you don't run where you should go. You try to save fuel or something and then that bites you in the butt too. So, but anyway, it could have been worse.
I'm not nearly as interesting as Lando, but
You do survey to go.
we sort of saw. I guess we'll start. I did the charter in Shumagens, so I think we were a little below expectations in most areas up there. And one really interesting observation we made, and we caught a few pretty big fish in the 200 plus range, and the weighted age and the weight at length was way below the chart that we've been using all these years. And it just sort of told me halibut aren't healthy right now. You know, we've been fictitiously dreaming that we see the first inklings of a strong recruitment year for the last forever. I think we kind of almost didn't even say that last year finally, but we've been saying it for a long time. But it feels like that the fish aren't that healthy right now up that way. Anyways, I didn't fish in Canada, but we have a fleet of boats that fish in Canada, and through the processing side, there's only about that many processors left nowadays. So we all talk quite a bit about where the fish is and what it is. It's not as secretive as it used to be. I think that the fishing certainly wasn't as concentrated as it was last year. Fishing was slow at the opening, slow through the spring, very slow in the summer. You're always going to find a superstar that goes out and gets a big trip, but the preponderance was that fishing was really slow through the year and sort of picked up a bit here in the fall. There could be more reasons for that than just proliferation. We've got we've got a smaller fleet than we used to, and the guys are fishing in. There's about 5 spots where everybody fishes. We all struggle with crew. We all struggle with captains. We're all got these guys fishing they don't have the long season, and the coast, they don't move all the time like Jim. They're trying to pound their trip out of the only one or two places that they know. And, you know, like Lando said, you got guys piled into one area, all trying to take their trip out of that. They don't have a lot of fish to catch. So a couple of the areas are known for really small fish. So they're pounding away on, you know, 12, 13 pound average fish, which is horrifying. So it's hard to draw a whole lot of conclusions, like just like the fish charters, our sampling is less and less and less, and there isn't many guys prospecting as there used to be. There's places out there where there is fish that people aren't hitting as hard as they used to. So it seemed to me it was disturbingly poor fishing all through this season until some of the guys coming into September, maybe later than that, started to get some good fishing. I'm not sure what that means, but anyways, that's what I got.
You're doing a survey in June.
Yes.
Yeah, we fish out of Area 2A, out of Westport, out of Grace Harbor. And years ago, the way the tribal agreement worked is we would all try to fish right around the opening of the halibut season, weather dependent. And we had pretty good luck. And in the last several years now, the tribes can decide when they want to go fishing based on their personal weather criteria. So our guys are right around March or during the halibut opener. My guys are making too much money crabbing, so they don't want to go long lining. And they've been pushing it back to late May, early June when the weathers were really nice and flat and everything. And I think you guys remember last year I came in here and I said, you know, typically we'd find a lot of fish, but we went out and we didn't find any fish. And I'll echo what you said over there about 2A is, yeah, that first opener, the halibut simply weren't there. And it wasn't until July and August, that's when we started finding the halibut again. So for some reason, they're just not there when they've typically been there, and they're showing up later in the summer. And then, of course, talking about sand fleas, that's when our buyer tells all the fishermen and says, hey, the further we go into the summer, the more and more sand fleas are going to show up, and that means I'm going to be paying you a lower price. Oh, and I will also say that, yeah, there was a ton of little fish on the ground, so that was kind of encouraging for future years.
Sure. With the exception of 2C, we fish every area in the U.S. Starting in 3A, we fished in May, and fishing was okay with a little bit of whale depredation. And then we fished it again in the end of August, and fishing was slower, and whale depredation, sperm whale depredation, reminded me of just before we went to pots with black cod fishing. It was that bad. I mean, they're stripping us clean. We're spreading gear out, and then by spreading gear out, you're fishing later into the day and you're running into sand flea issues. Our last trip of the season is usually 3A, and we try to run it south. And I was encouraged to find a new buyer that was out of Port Angeles. But then when it came time to do my prior notice of landing and land the fish, I was told that Port Angeles is not an approved landing port. A NIMS officer told me that. So I was discouraging because it was a good price. I'm told that the only two approved landing ports in Washington State are Bellingham and Seattle. Later, NIMS came back to say that I could have landed under the term other. I'm trying to get NIMS to clarify that in writing, and it's been a little slow on that. Moving west to 3B, I just felt it was kind of flat compared to, you know, the previous season. Nothing really too much to report on that. 4A, like Lando said, maybe I got lucky with not getting hit by killer whales, but took us a day and a half to catch 7,000 pounds. And, you know, the quota is going down, as has been mentioned by Jim. The quota is going down in some of these areas to the point where it's almost not economically viable to go out and catch it. But thankfully, we have a new buyer that came online out in Dutch Harbor, in various other areas, but particularly in Dutch Harbor, where we're getting a pretty good price for the frozen product. And so that was our 4A fish. And 4B, you know, if you're willing to fish in areas you wouldn't normally fish in, meaning passes, where you can only fish certain days of the month or even of the year, and it's, you know, really weather predominant, and we did okay. So, you know, size-wise and stuff like that, it was fine. 4D, I'll still stand by my belief that there's localized depletion going on up there, even though the stance from the IPHC is there's no such thing as localized depletion around the island because the stock's coming from the edge. But we were one of the first boats up there, and fishing was really tough. And I don't know if you went up there this year, Lando, but one thing I have noticed in years past up there is the stomachs of those halibut, when you dress them, are loaded full of blue king crab. Is always pretty much a given. They'd just be stuffed with baby blue king crab. And lately, and especially this past season, I'm seeing no baby blue king crab in the stomachs. I'm seeing maybe lyre crab. Hopefully I'm saying that right. Maybe the scientists know that. The lyre crab or the decorator crab, they're those little smaller crabs. You'll see those, but yeah, they used to be stuffed with baby blue king crab. And then bycatch wise up there seems to be more and more of the Irish lords. So that's kind of what we ran into up there. So again, fishing has not improved up there. And like I said, I feel I was probably one of the first boats up there. It's an area of concern to me. So yeah, those are fishing for the season.
Yeah, my season was pretty good. It wasn't exceptional, but in the spring, I just kind of went out a little bit later than everybody in a time when it's in May, when there's not a lot of guys out. And I went to a spot where there's no whales. And we just had to run a ton of gear. We managed to put a trip together. And then in the summertime, I tried to do a little trip after the survey, and the fishing was just abysmal. I've never seen it so poor. I mean, I'm in Canada 2B. So I had a bit of fish left over for the fall, and in the fall, the fishing actually was exceptional. So it was a good thing. I heard a lot of guys were doing quite good in the fall. So there was a good sign there, but the whales definitely have increased their presence. The west coast of Haida Gwaii used to be just a sperm whale show, but now the orcas are out there. And I was doing a black cod trip in September off Vancouver Island, and the orcas were really bad there too. So definitely an uptick in orca presence. And yeah, that's the biggest factor. It's definitely just dancing around the whales here.
Sorry, just to clarify, so you saw the uptick in orca presence in fall in comparison to earlier in the year, or just throughout the whole year?
Well, they never used to exist on the west coast of Haida Gwaii. And so like the sperm whales kind of had a territory out there. And for the first time, guys are seeing the orcas moving into that sperm whale territory and, you know, fighting for ground on the edge with the sperm whales. And southern Vancouver Island, I've never heard of the orcas down there, but I was doing slinky pots, and they were just every day they'd poke around and see if they haven't started doing that yet, but you know, they just come by, and I think they're harassing everybody else, and then everybody would move and they'd come check me out. And yeah, so they're definitely they're roaming around everywhere now.
Yes, I'm glad you said something about the orca situation there, because it is pretty much off Yakutat. You can pretty much count on certain times of the year there now, and Cross Sound, and you know, it seems, and then off the Port Lock area, you pretty much count on them around there in June now. And it's interesting how there's just that population's exploding. And of course, I think they figure all populations are growing about 7% a year. So extrapolation of numbers on the whales it's kind of a down. It's not good for the commercial fishing industry, I don't think.
Yeah, it's not a good sign when you'll see, you know, just as many juveniles as adults. You could tell that their population is growing fast. You know, there might be 3 adults and there might be, 6 juveniles. So I think their rate of increase is pretty successful. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I don't know what I can add to this because as far as commercial fishing goes, I don't actively fish and haven't for about 25 years. I get occasional reports from the few people that are willing to fish anymore for people like me, at least my quota. But it's been rather incomplete. It seems to me that I had some halibut that was available to harvest, and I couldn't really get at least one party to be interested in doing it. That was late in the season, so this would have been 3A halibut. That I guess that tells you something. But what I do know is I send out, on average, about 8 boats a day with 3.5 people on those boats that spend anywhere from an hour to 2 hours a day fishing for halibut. And I can tell you that we still catch and keep target halibut 100 pounds to 300 pounds. And they seem to be, if I motivate my guys to go out and try to find them, they still seem to be there. And naturally, that's kind of what puts us on the map. We're obviously vilified by doing so. Whether that's correct or not, I don't think it is. But, we do get a lot of attention for that, mostly positive. What I can say about the abundance of halibut and the slot limit, because we essentially do 2 things. We look for halibut that are big, because we have what's called guided angler fish, which is commercial quota that's converted into the right to keep a big halibut. And we target fish that are 37, 38, 40, whatever the slot limit is, that size. So we're not interested in looking for 40 and 50 pound halibut. We don't go there. We don't go back there because those are fish that I shouldn't say nobody wants to buy, but we won't let them buy. We're not going to convert guided angler fish into 50-pound halibut, but people have tons of money and they'll do it. So we have to say, no, we're not, sorry. It's got to be a fish about 100 pounds. Otherwise, we won't be able to have enough gaff fish to satisfy our customers later in the year. So to get back to that slot limit fish, 37 inch, whatever it was this year, because I've had captain, I don't follow it really closely. The places that we've gone reliably for those fish have off of Yacobi Island, which is just south of Cross Sound in Area 2C. Those fish, for the first time ever, seem to be kind of hard to find. Now, this is anecdotal, and it's confined to one area year after year after year after year that we fish because we're a fishing lodge and we're not going to, generally go very far away. And in August, it dried up, not completely, but it was very, very difficult to catch those 37, 38 inch halibut. And sometimes guys would go out there and sit for 2 hours. And usually, we could sit there the reason you sat there for more than 20 minutes was because, well, I don't want a 34 inch halibut. I want a 36 inch halibut, so I'm like, yeah, okay, fine. We'll try that. But not that it makes sense, but people they want a bigger fish rather than a tiny, a fish that's 2 pounds smaller. But now they were leaving without catching 4 people a 37 inch fish. And that's peculiar and unusual. And the only other thing I would add to that report, and I don't know if I'm actually speaking to my microphone or not, hearing aid thing. But we have also fished in 3A on the north side of Cross Sound for 20 years. And for the first 10 years, it was unbelievable fishing. And we just fished one little corner, one little spot, year after year after year. You know, not every day because it's a long ways away, but we would take people out there, we could keep at least one halibut of any size. And for the past 5 or 6 years, I'm getting old now, so everything seems like it happened yesterday. But I think about 5 or 6 years, maybe a little longer, those fish on the other side of Cross Sound are used to be unbelievable. You know, we catch 30 or 40 fish that average 30 pounds in 3 hours with 4 lines in the water. And now it's like you get there and it's not worth the trip. And then we go, oh, this is disappointing. Man, we'll leave it alone for a week or two. Go back out there. Nah, waste of time again. And some people go all the way out there and don't catch any fish worth keeping. It might be like a slot limit fish. And they decide, you know what? This is so bad. I'm going to go back to 2C, not catch any fish here because you'd be stuck there, and go catch my small slot limit fish. At least I get one for everybody. And so I've been telling people, hey, quit going out there. You're burning a bunch of fuel for nothing. Go out once a month instead of once a week. And don't bring 7 boats out there for crying out loud. What a crapshoot that would be. So those are the things, you know, that I have noticed with my little fleet of boats fishing in that area of 2C and 3A. How that fits into all the other anecdotal evidence, I don't know, but there it is.
Yeah, I don't really have a lot to say. I had the medical out this year because things, but the guys I've been talking with, the early season wasn't very good round out of Homer, but I got much better later on. I didn't really hear a lot of complaints about sand fleas. I did hear a lot of complaints about the trawl fleet and limits. But I mean, that's not really our job as a science committee. So that's just something I want to throw out there. And price was incredible. About all I got. Thanks.
Before we go online, any final questions for each other in the room at the moment?
We were up there middle of July. It was us and Northern Prince. And then, I'm sorry? I didn't see them up there. Yeah, weather was horrible. Really, really horrible. Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't hear any good reports at all. Well, Robert on the St. Peter.
Orlando, can you please use the microphone? The online people cannot hear. Thanks.
Yeah. Robert on the St. Peter had one decent trip and went up there like 5 times and, you know, just bombed. Yeah, so it's definitely, I mean, the last decade or more, we've been pulling, what, 1 million pounds out of there or something? And Robert Hansen on the Oracle or whatever boat he's on, did really poorly up there, and he always does great. And he was up there early, late, whatever, or maybe this summer and then in the fall here. So yeah, that's a pretty big concern. I don't know if you guys have the stats on 4D harvest broke down. I mean, like you sent out the catch the catch percentage here on a regular basis, but you don't really break it down. But I'd be interested to know how much of 4D got caught. Probably not a lot, but, and you know, I don't know. Did you go to the Edge this year out there?
I went the year before last. So it was a lesson in futility.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you bring up a good point, Lando. And I mean, most of the data that I've collected on St. Matthew and what I feel in my opinion, is localized depletion was all data that the Secretariat provided for me. And yeah, it's over 1 million pounds is being harvested from St. Matthew, which is like 25-mile long island. Only half of the island actually really contains halibut.
Right.
And yeah, it was like 98% of the 4C D and E fish was being caught up there.
Yeah, and
To me-
4C reports out of there were real skinny too.
Yeah,
I mean, Jeff and those guys did okay, but Jeff always does okay. But yeah, they don't have much to catch there anyway. But yeah, it's a shame.
Basha, sorry, is there anything else on 4D in terms of breakdown we can provide or not?
Well, we provided all the information that we had available. I'm not sure there's anything specific that we could think that could be helpful on top of that, what we provided last time as a part of that proposal that was submitted. But if anybody has an idea how we can compile the data in any other way, we can certainly help with that.
Okay, let's go online then. Angus, do you want to chime in?
Yeah, sure. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, no problem.
Okay, right on. Yeah, our fishing was a little different this year. We did the majority of our trips as halibut sablefish combos. So our patterns changed a little bit. We did one directed trip in the summer, which was productive. Really encouraging to see lots of small fish in the Hecate Straits and lots of really small fish on that one trip. And yeah, decent halibut fishing. But for the most part, it was, as I say, combo trips. So we didn't have the issues with the whales because we'd be only setting, 2 or 3 halibut strings, directed halibut strings a trip. But yeah, I was encouraged. We also did the hard bottom longline survey on the west coast of Haida Gwaii, as well as halfway up the east side, and lots of small fish there. Again, mountains of yellow eye. So we're still looking at the west coast of Haida Gwaii basically being a marine park inside 90 fathoms, because we're setting 2 skate strings with 450 hooks on them, and oftentimes we'll have over 200 yellow eye on those 450 hooks. So that, yeah, really impacts things. You just can't get in there if you're a normal commercial halibut fisher with the amount of yellow eye quota that's available. But yeah, for the most part, we saw a good sign of halibut. I know there was lots of reports from other fishermen that the fishing was scratchy. But again, I as well would echo what the other gentlemen from 2B have said. It did pick up in the fall. I've heard of some good trips. And actually, from the fishermen I talked to in the Hecate Straits, it seemed to be one set of tides sort of around, goodness, mid-July. And then, the big fish started to show up, and it really improved after that. Went from pretty scratchy to really good fishing. So I'm trying to think of anything else germane. Water was definitely colder than it's been in previous years at the beginning of the year, and stayed colder for considerably longer. So it was, a little different ocean conditions out there this year. At least that was my experience. And I think that's about all I have. Yeah.
Thanks, Angus. Any questions for Angus? Clarifications? If not, Brian, can you give us a quick update as well?
Yeah, my operation is out of Homer, so we're mostly fishing. Farthest we'll make it is the Barren Islands, and then south and east probably to Gore Point. Got, I think, 7 boats that book out of my office. I just run one of them, but fishing was pretty good. Lots of young fish. I thought that the average size this year was actually better. I'm running a boat that takes 22 people. I thought that size on average was pretty good. There was maybe a month and a half part of the season there where in Cook Inlet it really felt like you couldn't miss. You could just go out there and get on good fish. It felt like anywhere. Probably late July, early August, there was maybe a 2-week period though. We had a big tide cycle, a couple 25 footers. And after that, there was 2 weeks where it was the scratchiest fishing I've seen in my life. It was horrible. I never, none of us ever really did figure out what that was about. Nobody was out, hammering Cook Inlet or these other areas, but it was like there was no fish from Elizabeth Island all the way up to Calgon. There was no fish. It was difficult, and that was pretty concerning. But overall, besides that, I thought it was a pretty good season. Lots of Pacific cod early in the season and lots of black cod late in the season. But that's it.
Cheers. Any questions? Follow-up comments? Not seeing any. Lauren.
Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Well, I was on maternity leave this spring and summer, so I wasn't paying a ton of attention. But the family and friends that fish, I'm out of Sitka, so 2C and 3A. And this spring fishing was still pretty scratchy. Didn't seem like as many dogfish from what I was hearing. And then in the fall, most of the folks that I'm friends with are doing combo sets. And I think somebody earlier just mentioned this as well, that it was not as many whale issues, of course, and some good big fish actually this kind of fall and winter. So that was kind of interesting to see and hear about. And I think that's it for me.
Great. Thank you very much. Any questions, comments for Lauren? If not, Tiara.
Yeah, hi there. I was also on maternity leave, so I wasn't out on the boat this year, but Angus and I fish on the same boat, so I'll defer to his observations. And yeah, just anecdotally, I heard a lot of scratchy fishing this year.
Okay, I'm just going to open it up again if there are any other final questions or comments for each other, but then also for the Secretariat, if you have any particular questions to follow up to some of the comments from RAB members that you'd like to ask at this point.
Maybe I'll have a small comment. I know that I think it was Angus who mentioned that the water was cooler this year. Did anybody else notice any environmental conditions that were different this year than from any other year?
Yeah, I'll make a comment on that. One thing we found very frustrating this year is the change in administration and the cutting of funding to a lot of the arrays that are off the West Coast. So, one of my fishermen came in, and he typically has these little holes that he goes to, and he always finds these really big halibut in them, and he simply found nothing this year and was asking if there was a hypoxia event going on, and the instruments had been shut off. So there was no way for us to know what the conditions were on our grounds. So that was pretty frustrating.
Yeah, I guess primarily a question for Jason and Thierry and Angus and 2B. I'm wondering, has the yellow eye bottleneck settled down enough that people have a strategy to get around them now, or is that still an ongoing challenge of avoiding yellow eye and changing spots?
Is it okay if I speak to that?
Yeah, go ahead, Angus.
Yeah, no, it is very much a problem. Like I say, on the west side of Haida Gwaii, there's 150 miles of coastline that we pretty much can't get inside because the yellow eye is so thick there, and the quotas are nowhere near what they need to be. We're in the process of trying to address that, and maybe there's some sanity coming into DFO about it, but it is a slow process. And yeah, no, and we're having trouble finding, there's still quota left, but we can't access it, and we're trying to find out where it is. We're not sure whether it's sitting on First Nations licenses but yeah, no, the struggle is real.
Yeah. My cousin uses blackcod heads for bait, and he's got a major reduction in yellow eye. I don't know if that's a thing or not, but he swears by it. And massive baits, and some guys will try massive hooks, but yeah, like Angus said, it's pretty impossible with the amount of quota we have.
And sorry, Bruce, I didn't mean to leave you out of the list. I'd be interested in your opinion as well.
No, it's fine. I actually didn't think of some of this until the other fellas started talking. The yellow eyes, we're in a rebuilding phase, and it's not as dire as it was a couple of years ago, so it's a little bit better than it was. But when the fishing got really, really slow through the sort of late June, July, August window, when everybody was running around scratching, part of it was they couldn't go out into the deep because you get into the blackcod, and couldn't go up into the shallows because you get into the yellow eye. So, not only are they concentrated into just a few areas, especially on the west side of Haida Gwaii, they couldn't go up in the shallows. We've done that blackcod head thing too, and it does work really good. You only have so many of them. But the other thing is when the whales come in, the sperm whales, they just row down your gear and floss it, right? That's not a big deal. But the orcas are a little more particular. They go down there and they take off the halibut and the blackcod, and they leave all your rockfish. So you get in yellow eye trouble even worse. You're getting double screwed by the orcas. You come in with a whole bunch of yellow eye, and I guess you might have got into some halibut, but they're long gone by the time you get it back. So that's a problem as well. So.
Yeah,
I did just want. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, I did want to say we tried running 20-aught hooks for several years there, and you catch real big yellow eye. I don't know if you've seen rose thorns. Rose thorns come up on a 20-aught as well. So.
Well, I was just going to say, when they mentioned the yellow eye, I'm avoiding a few areas now because of the yellow eye population buildup in Alaskan waters, and that's a little frustrating because we're a lot of 5% bycatch, and with the quotas going down on the halibut, we just don't have that much, and we also have mandatory retention. So then you fill the boat up with rockfish, and then the enforcement guys don't like that either. So they might give you a warning, they might not. But I'm skipping areas now that I fished halibut a lot in, and just because of the yellow eye buildup in those areas. And then the other thing I noticed too, you might be seeing it out west, but the yellow eye range is extending further west too. We're seeing it all the way out Dutch Harbor area now, in some spots. And 30 years ago, we never saw yellow eye out past maybe Sand Point or even before Sand Point. So I don't know, things change. We just have to adapt with what's going on, I guess. So.
Yeah, I'm seeing the yellow eye increase in their range. They're not just in hard bottom now, they're going down the reef into the softer bottom. And, before you could do okay in gravel, and now, the numbers are too strong in the gravel too. So, it pushes a lot of us to fish, on the edges where the whale, predation is the worst. So yeah, I mean, it's definitely a problem.
Yeah, and I would just add that, in BC, we have areas we've fished for the last 100 years, and when they really clamped down on the yellow eye, we got forced out of those areas, and we'll never get back into them. They've come back so strongly, and we're also catching them. I was catching them into the 150s this year, so they're moving deeper as well. But in addition to that, we're facing a bit of a dogfish crisis in 2B now. DFO is convinced that the dogfish, or that we've eradicated them. We don't feel that's the case. We think their patterns have changed because they seem to show up in the fall gangbusters. And I'm just wondering whether you guys have any dogfish observations that you've encountered in your halibut fishery, and whether the patterns have changed for them as well.
Yeah, Angus, I saw phenomenal amounts of dogfish, the southern end of 2C this year on the survey. It was just blanketed, the southern third of the stations down there, which I don't think is very traditional.
Man, I would concur too, because that's one of the reasons we don't bother to go 20 miles offshore. It's just dogfish. There could be halibut there, and I've seen that, and I don't actively fish charter fish anymore either. It's been 6 years or so since I've really gone out. But even back then, when 3A used to be started to become untenable for us, up across Sound, if you did catch a halibut, by the time you got it up 85 fathoms, it wasn't a halibut anymore. It was half of it was eaten. And there'd be 6 or 7 dogfish swimming. And to get your line down to the bottom, it doesn't take long to drop a 3-pound lead down to the 85 fathoms, but you get down to about 80 fathoms or 70 fathoms before you get anywhere near the bottom. All of a sudden, the line goes slack because the dogfish, you just bite your gannion and cut it, and you lose the lead, the hook, everything. I guess they smelled something good to eat on it. And is that bad? It's just really unbelievable. It's like, get the hell out of here.
On the dogfish thing, we've just had a series of blackcod and halibut meetings in BC, and DFO, we can't even have a meeting without dogfish taking over the whole conversation. Everyone's freaking out about dogfish. This is our next choke species. There's no dogfish. The science we're saying, well, we see tons of dogfish. We all try to fish where there isn't dogfish, and there's no directed dogfish fishery, so it's all bycatch data anyways. The rockfish survey, the sablefish survey, the halibut surveys, they're all trying to stay away from dogfish. And later in the year, when they move up into some areas, we all know where they are, and we don't want to do them. And when the moon, some areas, the whole industry, but they're saying, well, we don't care what you say in BC, because the trawl data and the Alaska data says they're going down. The California data says they're going down. So you can sit here and whine about dogfish all you want, but we're not really listening to you. And we only do an assessment once every 5 years. And the next assessment isn't until 2029. And we've cut it in half. And now we've the dogfish quota, which isn't fished, but then we've cut it in half again. We're going to have we've got a yellow eye cyclone coming in dogfish, which sounds to me to be worse than the yellow eye one that we're just slowly clawing our way out of. So if you guys have got more data to say there's lots of dogfish, we better start getting it out there, because we're on a really bad. DFO in Canada has just got this in their head. They're happily chewing on another reason to shut us down and create that, and it's dangerous. We're very concerned about it, especially started this year. So
I think the state of Alaska classifies dogfish as a protected species. So I think we're in the same trouble.
Really,
they can't even talk about it. And I had a conversation with a state biologist about it, and she was just adamant that we didn't know what we're seeing. So it doesn't help when you don't have an open dialogue.
Yeah, I don't really have a frame of reference because I don't spend a lot of time in the Eastern Gulf over Yakutat Way and stuff. But I did the survey over there this year, and I forgot to mention dogfish in my earlier deal because it was so painful. I think I blocked it out of my memory. But I wish Greg or Sylvester were here. I mean, you guys have the data from that survey. It was unbelievable. I almost quit in the middle of the survey. I couldn't shake any more dogfish. It was unbelievable. And yeah, I blocked that out. But yeah, it was really there. I mean, we fished more in the around Kayak and off the edge there and stuff. So we have dogfish there. But it's really, it changes a lot. You know, some years you can't you come back, every hook's a dogfish, and the next year you go back and every hook's a halibut. So, but over near Yakutat, they're starting in June and all through June, it was painful.
If I could circle back to the St. Matthew issue, you asked about the data part. Is very helpful in what you guys were presented for me when I wrote the proposal and what I took up at the council. But if we could get more specific, we tend to group 4C, D, and E together a lot in that data. If we could get more specific in saying how much of, say, 4D was caught on the edge, how much was caught at St. Matthew, same for 4C, how much was caught around the cribs, how much was caught in St. Matthew, maybe how much of their quota was left unfished. Really get specific. That would be helpful in trying to address this and point it out.
We can certainly look into that. If you provide us the details, we can look into, of course, the confidentiality rules apply. So it all depends how many vessels that would apply to, but we can certainly help with that.
Okay, that's an interesting point, the confidentiality part. I mean, it's a resource coming out of the water. I don't quite understand why there's some fisheries are confidential and others aren't, but anyway.
It's not about the fish. It's about the vessel numbers right? So we just do not reveal. So the rules states that we can provide the data that includes at least 3 vessels.
Okay, so if I understand you correctly, less than 3 vessels, it's confidential? Okay, interesting.
Yes, no, I just had a question for staff in terms of dogfish and the survey. I mean, I'm presuming as the survey's gotten more sparse, if the station has a history of having straight dogfish on it, would that be something you guys would be excluding from the survey? And I'm just wondering whether that might be affecting the data that's coming out of Alaska somehow, or BC.
Yeah, so we don't call any stations ineffective. So those would be our excluded stations. We don't call them ineffective for dogfish in 99.99% of cases. But as Lando kind of said, in a way, it kind of comes out in a wash, because what year to year, sometimes one specific station just has a ton of dogfish and no halibut. Next year you come back and there's halibut all over that. So they do move around a lot, right? So I don't know if there's an easy way of necessarily quantifying a way to keep out specific stations for dogfish activity. However, they do show up in our 20 hook count. So we have extrapolated that data to see how much per station per year the occurrence rate is. And I know Ray has looked a little bit at that and has found some patterns like year to year where we catch some more, where we catch some less. But yeah, if he wants to talk about that more, he can.
Yeah, I just left the room to look that up. So I'm pointing out again that we didn't fish all of 3A or all of 2C this year, so it's can be quite dependent on the specific areas that we fished. But dogfish catch rates were much higher in 2C and 3A this year than they were in last year. 2B seems similar, but again, it might be a function of the specific survey regions that we fished.
Yeah, I think sometimes historically, more in fishing than the surveys, you'll be in a spot and there's halibut there, and you just can't get hooks to the bottom, especially when it's like a full moon, they're up in the water column, especially if you're fishing squid. Dogfish love squid, right? And you can't get your hooks to the bottom. There's been times when you just fish out dogfish. You just slaughter every dogfish you can get your hands on and get down to the halibut, and there is halibut there. But I think somehow we need to quantify the preponderance of dogfish, because we've got conflicting mandates. We want them to be there and we want them to be healthy, but we don't want, somehow we need to figure out how to quantify that, because we're heading down a tough path here, I think.
I know you can't do it on a survey, but what we do is we just start cutting up dogfish for bait. It's great halibut bait. And then you'll find out if the halibut are there under the dogfish. It's pretty amazing what you learn sometimes. And it makes good bait. It's cheap too.
One thing I forgot to mention is we actually do have a collaboration with NOAA where we do collect length and weight data for up to a certain amount of dogfish for each region, including, that's for NOAA. However, we do collect that data also in 2B. So I wonder if that's being used in some way either.
I believe it is, but for us in 2B, I mean, there's no doubt that the dogfish aren't around in the summer months like as much as they used to be, but for whatever reason, in the winter, they're still there, but all their surveys that would check indices are taking place in the summer months.
What's the size of a dogfish that would be considered a mature size or a immature size? Because my understanding is most of what we're seeing in Alaska are immatures, but they say they have no commercial value anyway because they're not big enough. You got to get the big 4-footers, and we don't see that many of the big monsters. So where do they go? I mean, you see a mass of little ones. So where they go from there, I don't know. But I do know time of year is a huge factor. There's places where we used to fish peacock in January. You wouldn't go there in January because it's all peacock, it's all dogfish. And then by the 1st of February, it's all peacock. And we see that around the edges too, like Yakutat, for example. I fished that country over 50 years now, and we never saw dogfish up until about 10, 15 years ago. And then we'd see a few, and now it can be overrun with dogfish. And it works that whole edge all the way down through Cross Sound, working its way down. And Chatham Straits in January will be 100% dogfish. You wouldn't catch a blackcod in there if you had a set of hooks in there in January, but they're gone, and then blackcod are in there. So I don't know if it's layers on layers or what, but it's a kind of fascinating, but I don't know.
Okay, it might be a good place to break. So let's take our coffee break for the next 15 minutes or so and come back at 11 a.m. Thank you very much, everybody. Okay, so let's move on to agenda item 5, and we're going to come back later this afternoon and then also tomorrow to continue the discussions we've been having this morning on a whole range of topics and try and redirect the Secretariat as possible to undertake some additional research over the coming years. And that really feeds into paper 05, which is just a very quick introduction to our next, for want of a better description, 5 years, but it's going to be an ongoing plan, integrated research and monitoring plan. And so paper 05 has as Appendix A, the current draft integrated research and monitoring plan. And this is the next phase of our research and monitoring, noting that our current plan is due to wrap up about mid-2026. And so we're going through that process and have been going through that updating process with the Scientific Review Board over the last 12 months. And as part of that review process of our existing plan for the next plan, the SRB has come up with 10 additional requests for consideration and incorporation into that plan. It's not my intention to go through the full plan in detail. Sorry, I'm going to try and get this the right size, which is at Appendix A. But I did want to just quickly walk through some of the requests for consideration and amendment coming from the Scientific Review Board. So Giuseppe, in just a moment, and with his team, is going to step through some of the key updates of the projects that have been ongoing with the previous plan that, as I said, will continue on until about middle of 2026, and then it will be replaced by this new version. And so for this new integrated research and monitoring plan, the SRB has requested these items. And the first is a sort of a tactical component, a 3 to 5 year component within the strategic plan itself. And that's become more and more important as we face continued funding challenges. We have funding challenges not only associated with the direct contracting party contributions that we receive from the two countries each year, but also in terms of our traditional grant sources, whether that be NPRB or a range of others that Giuseppe is going to talk about in just a little while. And so this makes a lot of sense that, it's hard to plan more than 3 to 5 years in terms of actual money we're expecting to get in at the moment. And so the SRB acknowledges that and is asking us to incorporate sort of a short-term component within the longer-term strategic plan itself. Makes a lot of sense. As part of that, it would require a bit of reprioritization of the research activities. At the moment, in our current plan, we've laid out a whole range of things, including longer than 5 year activities that we'd like to undertake. But again, noting this funding side of things to really try and prioritize some of those research activities to deliver on core requirements for the stock assessment and the management strategy evaluation work in particular. Looks like Australian slang. It means range-wide research. And so this is something that maybe I'll pass to Giuseppe just quickly, because you've just come back from the Pisces meeting where you have met with scientists working on the Western Pacific. So Giuseppe.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. This has been a long-standing effort on our part to engage with Eastern North Pacific research activities. Those have been a little challenging. As Dave just mentioned, I came back from a meeting last week in Japan. That was the annual meeting of the North Pacific Marine Science Organization. That's called Pisces as well. They hold meetings annually, and it's extremely well attended by Asian countries, including Russia. And there was a specific effort this year, given that there was a large Russian participation at the meeting, to try to engage with some Russian colleagues working on Pacific halibut. There were no individuals that were directly working on Pacific halibut at the meeting, but we spread the word around that we were interested in looking for potential collaborations to understand better the Pacific halibut population as a whole. Because, well, you're here today from our research. Obviously, we're looking at the Pacific halibut population within IPHC conventional waters, but the Pacific halibut are known to expand their range further than IPHC conventional waters. And we have fairly good evidence that there's a fair number of connectivity between the west and the eastern portions of the North Pacific in terms of Pacific halibut. So that is an effort that we're trying to pursue. So contacts have been made with potential Russian colleagues, and we'll see whether those contacts actually are fruitful in terms of establishing collaborations, potentially exchange of data, exchange of information, or even exchange of biological samples. So we'll see.
Great. The next one there is a cost-benefit analysis, and this was stimulated by some of the work that we've been undertaking on artificial intelligence usage, particularly to do with aging, but also some of the epigenetic aging methods that Giuseppe and his team are currently looking into. And so the SRB was asking us to consider developing a cost-benefit analysis process, or at least review process, of determining when a particular project would actually be beneficial to us, not only in terms of the scientific outputs, but also in terms of the costs for the commission, in terms of the research, but also the long-term application. And so, for example, AI usage with aging could have an implication for the need for full-time employees and those kinds of things. And so just to incorporate that into the plan itself. And as part of that, sort of as a follow-on, the inclusion of additional decision points of when a project should continue or when it's really run its course and it's time to either cease it from a scientific gain perspective or as well from a fiscal perspective. Number F there is observer coverage, and I think there's a lot of agreement that we should be trying to evaluate observer coverage, and particularly looking at catch and discard reporting from a scientific level. There's also a lot of pushback from contracting parties, agency staff to actually do that. So we're going to develop something along those lines and incorporate it in the plan, but we expect there's going to be some pushback there. And just to clarify, both contracting parties have indicated that they would like their own agencies to undertake those evaluations and not the IPHC. The inclusion of dashboards is something that we've explored in the past, particularly for the stock assessment or a stock status summary. But the SRB has requested that we try and look into that sort of dashboard summary, key research, what are the findings, the progress that's being made, and then to provide the links to those outcomes, whether it be on our website or some other format. And so that's something we're also are currently looking into, and I know Ian's going to potentially put some of those forward for this stock assessment side of things in the very near future. Communication, again, really just about trying to communicate the results, whether it be supplementary documentation on a particular project, progress reports, communication of independent reviews of the work we've been undertaking. So again, just trying to incorporate some kind of communication strategy within the integrated research and monitoring plan. And then the final two, measures of success. And so although the current draft plan lists some broad performance categories, the SRB is requesting that we include some project level indicators so that we can really measure against sort of milestone delivery of each of the research projects and monitoring activities that are included within the plan itself. And then finally, capacity building. Is there a formal capacity building plan to ensure the long-term viability of the plan itself? Something we need to explore a little bit more, how we're actually going to incorporate a component of that within the plan. And so it's probably the only one at the moment we're a little uncertain about how to actually develop. So those other 9 requests from the SRB are all works in progress. We do expect that the current integrated research and monitoring plan draft will be implemented next year. And then as per the last plan, it's just something that's going to be updated on an annual basis. And this is particularly important, as I was saying, because of the funding environment we find ourselves in. It's all well and good to put down a 5-10-year strategic research and monitoring plan. But given our current uncertainty with funding, both from contracting parties, but then also from traditional grant sources, we just need to take that into consideration and look a little bit more tactically for the next couple of years. So as I said, the draft plan itself is provided as Appendix A. I don't intend on walking you through that. You are going to hear about some of the research projects from Giuseppe in just a moment, and also how they're going to fit into this plan over the coming years. So with that said, I'll just pause and see if there's any questions, comments, particularly on those SRB requests. Everybody's content? Not seeing anything online either. Great. We will move to the next agenda item. And so, Giuseppe, I'll pass to you and I'll vacate this spot so that your team can come up and present as well. Cheers.
So I'm happy to report on some updates on current biological and system science research activities. We're going to focus basically on 3 topics. The first one is on population structure, and Andy, Jason, of which will speak to that. The second one is on our recent revision of maturity schedules and our plans to start looking at fecundity, and Colin Jones will speak to that. And lastly, the third update will be regarding our efforts to investigate methods for reducing well depredation by protecting longline catches, and Claude Dijkstra is going to speak to that. So the first topic is that on migration and population dynamics, and you've heard that in the past, but we've done some final updates on this project, and Andy is going to speak to you about our final results regarding the population structure of Pacific halibut. So go ahead, Andy.
All right. Thanks, Giuseppe. Let's see. Okay, so yeah, the next few slides are an update on kind of our population genomics research that's aimed at better understanding population structure. But before we get into the results portion of it, I'd like to start out with just a little bit of introduction to reorient everybody to the study design. So the main objective for this research is really to resolve the genetic structure of the Pacific halibut stock within IPHC convention waters, utilizing samples collected exclusively from spawning groups. So that means winter collected samples and collecting samples on or near known spawning grounds. And so the set of samples that we have to do this are shown in the map here. They were collected between the years of 1999 and 2020 from 5 different geographic areas. So that's going to be British Columbia, Central Gulf of Alaska, the Bering Sea, and the Central and Western Aleutian Islands. And so the method that we're utilizing to generate the raw data for this project is called low coverage whole genome resequencing. And essentially, this is a very high resolution method that enables us to sample every single base pair of DNA in an individual's genome. So since the previous RAB meeting, we've conducted an additional sequencing run, and this allowed us to add an additional 185 winter collected samples to this data set. And this was really done primarily to help us increase our estimates of accuracy for our assignment testing that we're conducting, and also to balance out the sample sizes among the various collections. So our finalized data set consists of 731 individuals. That's about 60 per collection. This data was generated across 4 different sequencing runs in total. And the quality filtered data set that we're utilizing for our core analyses consists of about 3.7 million autosomal SNPs, and these are individual mutations throughout the genome that we're investigating. So to better understand population structure and get a visual for what population structure might look like in Pacific halibut, one of the first things we did was conduct principal components analysis, or PCA. And this is a class called a dimensionality reduction technique, and it's a really nice tool for taking these large data sets and breaking them down so you can actually visualize, kind of major patterns that may be present in them. And so the main output of this is shown in the figure here. So in this figure, each point represents an individual, and each individual is colored by the geographic area in which they were collected from. And those lines represent 95% confidence ellipses associated with each geographic area that was sampled. And so think of this as, a visualization of the genetic relationships that are in our data set. And so what might immediately stand out is that there's a lot of overlap among the different geographic areas we sampled. And there's really only a single group of points that's a single cluster that's being identified here. And so to kind of back up the visual observation that we're seeing in the figure, we also performed on some unsupervised clustering on this data set to kind of go beyond the method of the eyeball and more quantitatively back this up. And essentially, we were still not able to identify any discrete genetic groupings present in our data set. So kind of the next core analysis that we're utilizing to help understand population structure is conducting assignment testing. And essentially with these tests, the question that we're asking is, can we actually assign individuals back to the population that they were sampled from, utilizing the genetic data that we've generated? So essentially using genetic signatures to identify a location of origin for a specific individual. And so like I mentioned on the last slide, part of this is actually evaluating the accuracy of those assignments. So essentially like how certain we can be that these assignments are correct. And what we found was that we observed very low assignment accuracy, about 35%. And kind of put this in context, for more structured species, like some various specific salmonids, these rates can exceed 90%. So we're, a far cry from that. And that's largely due to the lack of structure that we're observing in our data set. So in conclusion, we have improved the quality of our data set by increasing and balancing the sample sizes among the different areas that we sampled. And even utilizing high resolution genomic methods, we cannot identify discrete genetic groups among the population. And so essentially the interpretation here is that we're really dealing with a single genetic group of Pacific halibut that resides in IPHC convention waters. Also, we're observing a very low probability of accurately assigning individuals back to the location in which they were sampled due to the lack of structure. And then from a management perspective, these results do support the concept of a single genetic group in IPHC convention waters and are consistent with the current IPHC assessment practices, which models the coastwide stock as a single unit. And to kind of wrap things up here, I'd say these results are not necessarily surprising given what we know about movement patterns of Pacific halibut that have been studied using other methods like tagging. We know that they can undertake long distance movements, and they do so. And it's likely that these high rates of movements are leading to high rates of gene flow and the homogenization of genetic diversity over the large spatial scale that is IPHC convention waters. And so that's all I have. I don't know if we want to keep to questions or comments. Yeah.
So I guess the question I have is that if your conclusion is that there's really no diversification of the genetics, are you saying that maybe the researchers that have the value for the dollars put into it?
No, I wouldn't. I wouldn't say that. I mean, understanding stock structure is like a key component, and Ian may can weigh in on this, but understanding, the stock structure that you have is kind of a key assumption and sort of in the stock assessment models, right? So it kind of, again, like the last point, it sort of validates the current assumptions that we have about the stock assessment. Like if for example, if you had like hidden structure in your population, you'd want to know that because you might, revise how you approach the stock assessment. But Ian, may have more,
Yeah, I can add to that. I mean, part of it is that we didn't know the answer to this till we did it. And what we were interested in was whether there was a potential, for example, specifically out in the western part of 4B, we were concerned that there might be a case like you have with salmon where they go back, they're faithful to a specific river. If we have a component of the stock in western 4B that only lives there and is genetically different, and we don't know it, then we're not gonna manage that appropriately. We could get ourselves in trouble managing that as a coastwide stock. So this question was really specifically about trying to identify, is there a unique genetic piece somewhere in the geography of the stock that we need to be concerned about protecting? Because we can't replace it. If we wipe it out and other fish move in, they'd be different than the ones that are there. And it turns out that we don't see evidence for that. So that doesn't mean it wasn't worth doing. It was really definitely worth doing because this is a real concern across a lot of stocks is what's the genetic stock structure underneath where we're trying to manage. This also doesn't say that it's necessarily just mixing like crazy and the fish from Western 4B are mixing with everything else. We know from our tagging that there's actually not a lot of mixing back and forth across the Aleutians. In particular, I'm singling that area out because that's the one area that we had the most specific interest in. So there still is a lot of need to consider how to manage a stock that has really complex dynamics where we have some fish move, some fish don't move, some fish move long distances, some fish only go in one direction, some fish make circular migrations. There's a lot going on there. But the building block, we couldn't really do anything further without laying a good foundation, which is exactly the stuff that Andy's been doing, which is, do we have discrete genetic components at the bottom of the story?
Oh, I'm going to preface this next comment with, this is exceeding my educational, but what was your hypothesis of when you first, did you do a hypothesis before you do the research? Did it drastically deviate from what your hypothesis, what you thought was the results were going to be?
I don't know if you want to answer, Andy. I had a hypothesis. I'm not sure if it's exactly the same that Andy did.
Yeah. Well, like I said, it's not, I guess, given what we know about movement, like it's not surprising what we saw. But there was, a previous study that did suggest there may be some genetic structuring out in the Western Aleutians. But like with, genomic technology, it's like one of these things that like it almost advances, like you have new tools, right, to address these questions. And like, I guess, yeah, there's continually coming out with better tools to be able to like look at these things, right? And so that study was somewhat outdated. And so like, with, more modern tools, we kind of decided it's time to take a second look and see if we can, support or, or refute it, I guess, right?
So we were, in the past, we heard this would be along the presentation. We heard about the pop-up trackers, right? Or is this, I guess I'm hearing is that you're going to shift gears in your research away from, since you've established that the DNA is pretty much across the board the same, are you going to go more towards migration and
right. I mean, yeah,
displacement?
exactly. Like consider, I guess, the genomic tools and what is presented here, those would be considered like indirect, a way of indirectly, looking at movement, right? And, with tagging, like you could obviously have, that's like a more direct method. So you could have a more fine-grained picture at like specific individual fish movements, right? So that might be another, tool to look at.
So I think what I'm getting out of this is this kind of answers that question of some years ago when they were trying to say there was a specific stock out in the Aleutians and we need to be managed separately and have our own quota and everything else. I think that's what I'm getting out of this. So
Exactly. So we had previous research, as Andy mentioned, we had some early genetics work. We also had a lot of satellite tagging data that had been done. And there was a suggestion that we had a geographic boundary at the pass there, and I forget if it's Amchitka Pass. Lando was the one who went and collected the samples for us, east and west of the pass. Yeah.
No. East.
Actually, Andy, if you could go back to the map. Yep.
Thinking that the Russian fish stopped there.
And so that was the 2020 samples that Lando collected for us. We got them on both sides of the pass, and the idea was to go out there in the winter, which we only got one volunteer to do. Go out there. But you pulled it off. To go out there in the winter to collect them during the spawning season. So we knew that if there's separate spawning stocks, these fish are in the right place at the right time, collect them from both sides, and then add that to this bigger picture. And honestly, there were some reasons to think from the population dynamics that maybe that could have been a separate stock out there. And if so, we would need to treat it, like the way they do salmon. Like you wouldn't manage two rivers combined, you would separate them out. But it turns out that doesn't seem to be the case. And that's actually really valuable information for us to know. It doesn't mean that we might not have different kinds of dynamics going on out there, but it means that those fish are genetically the same fish as the rest of the stock.
Incline you to believe that those fish weren't migrating. I'm sorry.
It was definitely the satellite tagging, and even our pit tagging back from 20 years ago now showed very little exchange from the Aleutians back to the rest of the stock. But we do have, in fact, it hasn't been published, but we do have one fish that went from Bowers Ridge to the Pribilof Islands. So we have, and it's a small number, but we only have tens to hundreds of fish that we satellite tagged. So we know that there is some exchange out there, which is also consistent with this result.
So can I ask, because I heard the word cost benefit analysis a few minutes ago, can I ask, when do you conclude these studies and put your efforts somewhere else?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, like as far as this one's concerned, this is it. There's no more data being generated, so now we're working on writing paper and getting that published and, kind of and moving on to the next thing. So.
And I'm guessing from that conference in Japan, you're talking about talking with the Russian scientists, it'd be really nice to get some genetic data from their side of the border to see if the population expands in its conformity.
Right. Yeah. I mean, definitely. Absolutely. Yeah, it'd be great, and see how it looks. But, like obviously, yeah, logistical, it'd be great. Be awesome.
So does this kind of, it concludes they're all from the similar genome, but there still could be territoriality to it. It just doesn't disprove that, right?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, exactly. For sure. Yeah. Genetically similar, but yeah.
So with this finding, does this have any immediate effect on how we manage the population?
Actually, I believe that one.
Well, I would say yes, because if we had found that this was a separate stock, I would have had to cut the stock assessment off and do a separate stock assessment out there in the Western Aleutians. So it's not maybe an exciting thing to say, well, we're going to keep doing what we're doing and we have better support for it, but there would have been a change had we found the other result. I think had Andy said, no, look, these fish are totally separate out here, we would have had to separate that little component and do a separate stock assessment. It doesn't mean that we don't need to think about managing that portion of the range perhaps differently. There's certainly a different age structure out there. There's different dynamics. There's definitely a different level of productivity out there. So this was really more of a conservation question, and the fishery questions aren't actually very easily addressed with things like genetics. They take more things like tagging and other projects to get at the fishery management aspect of it.
So if they're genetically mixed, but then there's still some territoriality, like Bruce said, is it the larvae that are probably dispersing and moving around? Is that the life stage that could explain the genetic similarity?
Yeah, I mean, certainly, yeah, that is one aspect of it. Pelagic life history, right, is, it's sort of, there's a lot of mixing that occurs at that stage. And there's been some ocean current larval advection modeling that would support that. But also, again, from the tagging too, we know as adults, they move around quite a bit. And so I think it's, there's multiple contributors across all stages of life history, So yeah, to say that, it's only the larval stage, or, I think it's really, they move around a lot, no matter how big or small they are. So.
Any more questions on this topic? Anybody online?
I've got a
Bruce?
question for Dr. Stewart, maybe, or anyone. Do you think a lack of genetic diversity is good or bad?
I think it's good in light of environmental change and variability and everything else that's going on. I think halibut is an incredibly robust fish that inhabits warm water and cold water and high oxygen and low oxygen. And I think it's just reflective of this being a real generalist that can go everywhere from, San Francisco to Nome. And I think it bodes well for halibut in terms of its long-term sustainability. Things are going to change. Productivity is going to go up and down. But I don't, like many species, have a really tiny niche that they live in, really specific set of conditions. And I don't think that's the case for halibut. And I think not only can they survive across a lot of conditions, but they can move and they can get there. So we tag fish in the Bering Sea and we get them back off Oregon. We have fish that go 1,000 miles to their spawning ground and back again the next summer. And I think that's good. That kind of diversity in the population, I think, is good in the long term.
I'm just gonna finish. Sorry.
Go ahead.
Just wait. I agree with you, not maybe on that same level, but I mean, when you pull a 100-year-old halibut on deck, You think that fish has been swimming around down there killing shit for 100 years, right? And he's still there. They're a pretty tough animal. They don't have spines for defense. They're not a defense. They're the aggressor. They're like an alpha predator down there, and it's pretty interesting. They live all those different places, and there's such a narrow genetic footprint to them. It's pretty amazing, really.
Actually, my thought is you could plug black cod right into the same discussion. And the same management body could be handling that resource as well.
Yeah, in fact, actually, I think probably black cod are even more migratory than halibut. And we've joked for a long time we could have easily been the halibut and black cod commission if things had played out differently in the 1920s.
Actually, Andy, for his master's degree, worked precisely on black cod population structure, and you know, you can tell the story, but
I mean,
the results are not that different from what we're seeing with Pacific halibut.
Yeah, I mean, it's like very similar story. Like, you know, there's not a lot of, yeah, just the spatial structure isn't there because they, you know, move around so much. And it's, yeah.
But I think one thing that is important to realize is that, you know, within this genetic, I wouldn't even want to call it homogeneity, because these are not clones. These are genetically, but they're not distinct enough to warrant separate management action. But that does not exclude that Pacific halibut will have regional differences, and we see that. And you'll see it in the next example for reproduction. You'll see that from Colin that we're finding regional differences in terms of some life history characteristics. You know, the time of maturity, size at age, you know, a number of things. Even probably migratory characteristics are different regionally. But when you look at the genetic structure, that there's really no evidence for spatial structure. That's really what we were after, as you know, as both Ian and Andy were saying. You know, that was the key goal of the study. Is there any spatial structure that would warrant separate management action? And the answer to that question is no.
What's next? I mean, where do you move? Where do you go from here?
Well, yeah, from here, I mean, you know, this project is, you know, I guess that's, yeah, we got to have some discussions, you know, to decide where to, you know, take this next, or, you know, where to go with this next. But yeah, as far as, yeah, using, you know, genetics to assess population structure, I mean, unless, you know, you get samples from Russia or something, maybe you know, would weave that in. But yeah, those are, you know, larger discussions that would be, you know, probably part of the research plan, you know.
Yeah, Kevin, that's a really good question. We're asking ourselves that question right now, what to do next. One of the advantages of this method that Andy implemented here is that it's the highest resolution method for looking at genetic diversity that you could find today. So we have resolution at the single SNP level. So that means that we're able now to look at this collection of samples and see whether, you know, we could explain some genetic basis for some of the difference in characteristics that we're seeing. Maturity, for instance, if there's anything that we could actually look for potential markers that could assist us in or help us in guiding our research. So we have a minefield of data here that did not show any genetic structure differences, but could actually be pretty instrumental in understanding how Pacific halibut respond in terms of growth or maturity or migration. So, you know, there's a lot of questions to be asked now. And I think we probably have the means to do them. We just need to clarify and prioritize what are the most important questions.
Is there any indication or evidence that the spawning season is changing at all one way or the other? I think I remember on the survey coming up with fish that were in full spawning mode in the middle of July or something.
That's possible. Colin will probably, yeah, we'll have that discussion after Colin's presentation, because I think there could be some evidence for that. Yeah.
Is there any value in finding like a historical artifact and see if, would these genetics provide any insight into, has there been any evolution or any change in the genetics of the fish through history? Like, does that analysis help with something like that? That they, in the last 50 years, there's been some evolution or change in them?
I mean, I guess, yes, in theory it could. I mean, it's just a matter of obtaining those samples, right? Like, if a set of, people do things with like ancient DNA that they've, and stuff like that, to look at even say like longer time scales, but those samples have to be available. And I think, there was some work to see if we could get DNA out of otoliths in the past, like from the otolith archive, and that, like, yeah, we just couldn't extract usable DNA out of those samples, right? So the answer is yes, but there's like a limitation there that.
Would there be any purpose in that, do you think?
Anybody online has any questions? Well, if not, there's going to be plenty of time later on. So that we're going to be talking about is reproduction, and Colin's going to give you some very recent updates on a study that we initiated in 2022. But that study that Colin's going to describe was really possible because of the basic research that the IPHC Secretariat conducted over the previous 5 years, developing methods to stage the maturity of Pacific halibut females in a different manner, moving from what is currently being done traditionally is assessing maturity visually, looking at a gonad and classifying in 4 different stages, as opposed to a more accurate method that we've developed here, which involves the histological assessment. So basically sectioning the ovary and looking specifically at the state of the oocyte development within the ovary. So, Colin, go ahead.
All right, thanks a lot. Yeah, so we got some pretty exciting updates regarding this research we've been doing over the last 3 years, because the final output of this is actually going into the 2025 stock assessment. So over the last 3 years, from 2022 to 2024, we've been able to collect histology samples on our fishery independent setline survey. And we've collected over 3,200 histology samples, which is an incredible sample size given the time frame. So I'd just like to thank especially the vessel captains that are here present that have been directly involved in collecting these samples and their crew, because this was a huge effort. So a big thank you to all of them. In 2022, we collected samples across all 4 biological regions. And then the last couple of years, we've had a reduced FIS design. And so in 2023, we were able to get samples in regions 2 and 3. And then in 2024, we were able to get back out to region 4 in the Bering Sea and collect samples out there. And then also again in regions 2 and 3. So this is the direct output of looking at the kind of the spatial and temporal structure of the maturity ogives over the last 3 years. So I think I talked a little bit about the modeling of this. I won't go in too much depths this time, but what we're using are general additive models, or GAMs, and they provide a little bit more flexibility in the model output. So it allows basically the splines or the segments of the model to have a little bit more flexibility than maybe a generalized linear model, which would basically just be what, if you look down in the bottom right corner, which is region 4B, it would basically look just like that with no curvature. So what you see here is the outputs for all 4 biological regions, with region 2 in the top left, region 3 in the top right, region 4 in the bottom left, and region 4B in the bottom right. And what you see here, if you just look at region 2, you can see that there has been a shift through the time series. So in particular, in 2022, we saw a lot of later, older maturing fish in region 2. But then in 23 and 24, that curve has shifted to the left with younger maturing females in region 2. And then in region 3, once again, you see that there has been a slow step to the left through time, through this time frame, indicating that over this 3-year time frame, the females in that region have slowly been maturing younger and younger through that 3-year time span. And then region 4, once again, is also showing that in the 2 years. You see the black line on the right, and then the pink line on the left 2 years later, because we didn't have samples in 2023, is also showing younger maturing females. And so as you can see, kind of the big outcome of this data is that there has been a slow shift to the left through this 3-year time frame. And we can dive a little bit into that probably more if we start to maybe try to incorporate some environmental variables into our modeling to see whether or not temperature could have an effect on that. But right now we are not quite certain of why that's happening. And so now that we have the outputs for the 4 biological regions, what our ultimate goal was to potentially update our coastwide ogive, because that's what ultimately goes into the annual stock assessment. And so in order to do that, what we did was we took out the year effect in the model and we pooled all the data across all 4 biological regions during this 3-year time frame. And the output is shown on the figure on the right. So those colored lines are the regional outputs. And in order to create a new coastwide curve from these regional outputs, we calculated the ogive from weighted regional ogives using the average FIS space-time model abundance estimates from 2022 to 2024. And that's the FIS index that Dr. Webster produces every year based on the FIS data. So we use basically the average of the numbers per unit effort in order to create this new coastwide curve, which is that solid black line on the figure on the right. And basically, if you look closely, it ultimately falls roughly between region 2 and region 3. And that's sort of what we expected, because those 2 regions currently have the highest abundance estimates across the coastwide stock. And so those two regions are weighting the curve more heavily. And ultimately, what that gave us is a new A50 value, or age at 50% maturity, for females to be 9.8 years old. And if you recall, our current maturity ogive that was previously used in the assessment was an A50 of 11.6. So our histological data has shifted the curve almost 2 years to the left, indicating that females are maturing at a younger age than previously estimated. Now, it's also important to note that these 2 curves aren't direct apples to apples comparison, because the red line that's currently used in the assessment was only data from regulatory areas 2B and 3A. And the black line is now incorporating data from across the entire IPHC convention waters. So now, now that we have an update with histology data, what we ultimately wanted to do was we wanted to see whether or not our visual data is also shifting through time. So as you recall that Dr. Planas just mentioned was that every year on the FIS, going back decades, we've been collecting visual maturity estimates for practically every fish that gets an otolith. Basically, it's cut open, gets a maturity estimate, whether it's mature or immature. And so from the last 3 years, every fish that's gotten a histology sample has also gotten a visual estimate. And so what we did was we plotted this figure on the right here shows the visual data across this same three-year time span. And we created, once again, we used the FIS index to create a new coastwide curve. And so if you overlay, and that gives us an A50 of 10.3 years. So the visual data is also telling us that females through the same time frame have also been maturing at a younger age than previous estimates. So if you overlay all three of these now, you see that the visual estimate is kind of in the middle between the histology and the current estimate at 11.6. And so that kind of told us that our visual estimates are also doing a really good job of describing the current situation of age at maturity for females. And so now that we have both the histology and the visual estimates across this 3-year time frame, we wanted to go back even farther historically to get an understanding of how we can calibrate our visual maturity data to update our current maturity ogive in the assessment. And so in order to do that, we created a calibration between our histology and visual estimates. And I won't go too much into the details. Dr. Webster is the one that did a lot of this creation. But you see on the figures on the right, once again, we created a calibration factor for each biological region, similar to the breakout that we did for the histology data. And you can see that basically what it is in the middle of each figure, it's 0, and then it goes to -1 or 1. And so if it's going above 0, that basically means it's a shift up for a given age in proportion maturity. And if it's below 0, it means that it was a shift down or a negative in proportion mature for each individual fish. And so using this new calibration, what we did was we went back to 2002. And the reason why we did that was because that was when we changed our aging methods here at the IPHC. So previous to 2002, we did a lot of surface age reading. And in 2002 was when we changed it to the break and burn method. And so we wanted to go back to 2002 because that gave us the most accurate aging method that we're currently using. And so what you see on the figure on the right are recreated coastwide maturity ogives for the visual estimates all the way from 2002 to 2024. So 23 years are, 23 years worth of visual estimate data. And it's kind of hard to see the differences in the trend lines here. But basically, if you look really closely, the dark lines, which start in the early 2000s, are kind of in the middle of that kind of blob of colored lines. And as you'll see that actually through time through the 2000s, it's actually shifted to the right. And then in more recent years, it's now shifted towards the left. So we do see during this 23-year time frame, age and maturity in females has not been very consistent. It's gone to older females, but now it's gone shift to younger females through this time frame. So then what we did was we used our new calibration to create these new calibrated visual maturity ogives. So if I just flip back here, you can see how that's changed the visual estimates using the new kind of more precise estimate using the histology data to calibrate these visual maturity ogives using that. And so ultimately what we did was to create each of these separate yearly curves, we used a 3-year rolling data window. which means that if you take an individual year, say 2007, it means that year, that curve was created using the 2006, 2007, and 2008 data. And the reason why we did that was because it matched our 3-year time series with the histology data. And also using a 3-year data window allowed us to capture every biological region within that 3-year data window. Because as we started getting into the more recent years, we've had reductions in our FIS, and so we haven't been able to collect data across all biological regions. And so using this 3-year rolling data window allowed us to capture data in every biological region for all of the years that are represented here. So then what we did was we averaged across all of those 23 years worth of data to create basically these two lines here on the plot on the right. So what you see here is that the dotted line is the average fitted visual maturity, coast-wide maturity ogive. And so that's basically the maturity estimates without the calibration of the histology data. And now the solid black line is basically our new calibrated visual maturity ogive for the assessment. And you can see that better here on the figure on the right. And so you can see a comparison of the current maturity ogive, which had an A50 value of 11.6. And that new kind of neon green line is our new ogive with the calibrated visual estimates. And that gave us an A50 value of 11.0 years. So using all of this new information, what we found is that through this 23-year time frame, the visual maturity estimate has shifted slightly to the left and about a half-year reduction in age for females and for the A50 value. And then also what we did was that we truncated this curve at the age of 7, basically dropped it to 0% maturity. And so the current visual maturity estimates that are used in the assessment prior to 2025, that was truncated at age 8 because that was the age that we previously had assumed was the youngest age that females matured at. But now using histological data and information, we now know that females are capable of maturing at the age of 7. And that is the earliest age that we have now seen for females. And so I don't think Ian has updated his documents for the interim meeting, but just be aware that this is something that he will be probably mentioning in his interim meeting presentation as well as the annual meeting, and how this is potentially going to affect the spawning stock biomass for females. I won't get into much of the details now, but just be aware of that. That will be presented at the interim meetings and annual meetings for the coming year. So it's pretty exciting information. A lot of work was done in this, and it's kind of neat to be able to use both of our maturity estimate information, the visual and the histology now, to create a better, more precise, accurate estimate for female maturity. Yeah, so that's kind of in the conclusion of the maturity estimate side. I just have a couple of quick slides here regarding fecundity. And so I think this was presented to the RAB probably maybe a couple of years ago. So we are pursuing a specific type of methodology for fecundity. It's called the autodiametric method. And basically what this is you take a whole gonad weight out at sea, which is what we've been doing on the FIS for the past 3 years. And then you take a subsample of that gonad, you bring it back into the lab, you preserve it, bring it back into the lab. And what you do is you take a weighed subsample of that subsample from the whole gonad, and then you do basically you get a mean oocyte diameter or mean egg size diameter, and then you compute that out to get numbers of eggs or oocytes per gram of tissue, and then you extrapolate that towards the whole gonad weight, which gives you fecundity or total number of oocytes for that female. And so this is a method that a lot of people are started to use. We have some collaborators at the Northeast Fisheries Science Center with NOAA Fisheries that have given us a lot of input on this methodology. And so we're going to start to be processing samples here this fall and winter. So stay tuned. Next year, I'll probably have some preliminary results to be presented to the RAB. But the nice thing about this methodology is if you see that little figure on the right in the box there, that's basically called an autodiametric curve. And once you're able to build this curve out with basically mean oocyte diameter on the x-axis and number of oocytes per gram of tissue on the y-axis, it'll allow me or anybody else to process the samples faster because you won't have to actually take the weighing of the sample. You'll be able to just take that subsample, get a mean oocyte diameter, and be able to process it really quick. And so that's kind of the benefits of this methodology. And so really our ultimate goal is to answer the question of, is female Pacific halibut fecundity proportional to body weight? Because currently in the stock assessment, we are assuming that it's basically the number of eggs is proportional to body weight as they increase. So basically, we're assuming that if you take the regular length weight curve, that's the same relationship that the egg output would be for any female, whether they're 200 pounds or 10 pounds, right? And in body mass. And so what we really want to look for is what's called hyperallometry, which is seeing whether or not that relationship between egg output and body size is even exponentially increasing more than the regular length to weight relationship. So that's just something to keep in mind. A lot of people assume that, oh, wow, I see this exponential curve that's going up even faster once you get to like really large body size. But you also have to remember that the length to weight relationship is already a cubic function in itself. And so it has to be an even exponentially even bigger increase than that to really to see a proportional that's important for the stock assessment than what we're currently assessing. And so the past 3 years, including this year, we've used the FIS as well as some extra collections last year in the fall and then late summer this year to collect fecundity samples. We've been able to go out and collect a whole bunch of fecundity samples across all 4 biological regions. In particular, this year alone in 2025, we were able to get fecundity samples across all 4 biological regions, which was really exciting and a huge thank you to all the vessels and captains and crew that were able to help in doing that. And so we were able to purchase a new stereo microscope this year in the lab. And so, yeah, starting later this fall and into the winter, we're going to begin processing samples. So it'll be exciting to provide some early updates starting next year on this collection. And so I just have a quick conclusion slide here. So from the histology-based maturity estimates, what we're seeing is that in particular, region 3 is showing a higher proportion of mature females at younger ages compared to the rest of the IPHC convention waters. And then and then the regional and coastwide ogives have shifted to younger maturing females from 2022 to 2024. Our visual-based maturity estimates have kind of gone back and forth during the 23-year timeframe from 02 to 24, has not been consistent, but the calibrated coastwide ogive has shifted slightly to the left compared to the current assessment that Dr. Stewart's using. And then, yeah, the big question for us coming up next is fecundity, and that in itself could end up having a much larger impact on the stock assessment than the updated maturity estimates. And then I might just make a brief comment about what Lando said regarding spawning for females. So I do have a figure that's made that shows oocyte development or egg development through time of the sampling. So a lot of our samples were collected during the FIS window from May through September. And we are seeing that there is some regional differences in how quickly females are developing their eggs through the annual reproductive cycle, in particularly out west in region 4 and in 4B. We are seeing females out west tend to show quicker egg development in their annual reproductive cycle. Now, we don't know ultimately what that means, but we're going to continue to monitor that through time because we are collecting basically the histology sampling now is kind of more of a monitoring rather than a research. And we're going to continue to monitor those trends. But yes, if females are showing that they're in very late stage development already in June, July, it could potentially mean that they might be spawning sooner rather than what we are currently assuming in the winter months coastwide. So just something to think about. And I think that's all I got for my presentation. I'm taking questions if anybody has any.
So basically, the bigger the fish, the more eggs she's going to produce. Is that basically a decent assumption?
We don't know that. That's the question we're trying to answer.
Yeah. Okay. Well, what about the viability of the eggs of the older fish? Is there any data set that addresses that? You know, I mean, I don't know if that's even a thing or not, but
that is definitely a thing. A lot of people have looked at egg quality.
Yeah.
Potentially lipid analysis of individual eggs and oocytes. That has been brought up in small discussions here at the IPHC. First, what we want to do is answer the question that you just brought up, Lando, is that are the bigger females actually producing more eggs? Basically, in proportion to body weight, are they actually producing more eggs? It falls back on if you've heard of the BOF analogy, the big old fat fecund female fish. We don't know if that holds true for halibut. There have been some flatfish species in the New England area that are showing hyperallometry. It has been shown worldwide in a lot of different fish stocks, but specifically for Pacific halibut, we just don't know if that actually holds true. But once we can identify the answer to that, then the next step potentially in research is potentially looking at egg quality and whether or not maybe just because the bigger females aren't producing more eggs, they could be producing better quality eggs, which could ultimately mean that maybe those eggs have a better chance of survival or producing better larvae. You know, those are the types of questions that could be answered.
I have a question. It's a little bit not related, but like on all the spawning grounds, the major ones, the fish are always a smaller average. Like the smaller fish, you might get an even mix of females and males. And the big super spawner females are kind of lone wolves, you know, alone in the rock piles. You know, is their spawning successful? Are they just hanging out by themselves because that's where their food source is? And the major spawning's occurring on these edges where there's smaller fish? Do we have any research on that?
Not off the top of my head, I don't. Those are great questions and stuff that definitely we want to think about and keep addressing. That's why these types of board meetings are great, because it provides input from you guys who are actually out on the fishing grounds, who are actually seeing what's happening. And so it's very useful information to hear those kinds of comments.
I think that's one of the reasons I haven't really been a proponent of a year-round fishery, is because I've noticed what you're talking about. Like at this time of year going into December now, I know places where I could probably get 10 or 15,000 in a day. But that's because they're bunching up in preparation for the spawn. But you're right about the size. They're pretty much the same. You don't see big ones in that mix. I don't know. Are you gonna do it, Lando? I think that last winter job was a long time ago, and that was something else.
I just want to provide a little follow-up on this one. This is a really key project, and we've been working down a hierarchy of really critical biological information for the stock a few years ago, we finally got a way to estimate the sex ratio of the commercial catch. And that's like a fundamental piece that we needed to know. And then the next on the list was maturity. We needed to know what age do these things really mature? Like not when we just open them up and take a look out at sea, but we need to do it right in the lab and understand it for real. So this is a really key piece. And then the next big question is fecundity. Does a 100-pound female produce more eggs than two 50-pound females is really the question. And then once we answer that question, then we'll be on to the next tier, which is going to be quality. It's also going to be skip spawning probably will be another thing that we're interested in understanding. Do these fish actually spawn every year, or do they maybe the first time they spawn, they skip a year and then they spawn every year, or what? There's different strategies for different fish. But I really want to highlight that this is the next project in line of critical assessment information that, this is in our estimates of spawning biomass. It's in our estimates of reference points. Everything hinges on our understanding of when these fish mature. So this is really critical to basically all of the stock assessment stuff that happens.
Is there a correlation between, and that might be way out of bounds, but Steve was talking about your gap fishery or your larger fish, and you're prohibited from keeping the larger fish for some reason. If I'm hearing that right, you have a range of fish that you can target, and then anything over that goes to a different quota. Is that correct? Or count?
Well, so, I mean, this is really an important question to me on a personal level, because I get accused because we catch a high proportion of big halibut. And, as far as I know, I've never commercial fish, never released a big halibut on purpose because I thought somehow I'd be raping the ocean by taking these big spawners out of the population. So I'm not sure of your question, Kevin, but what we do is we're limited to 1 halibut a day in Area 2C, which is primarily where we fish. And it has to be either under 37 inches or 30, whatever it is. Each year it changes a little bit because we're trying to just move that line to make sure that the charter halibut catch doesn't exceed its limit, because they have a catch sharing plan with the commercial guys, right? And that's right, and that's fair. So we can keep a halibut over what is it, 72 inches, 230 pounds, or under 37 inches. And I don't fish, I forget what the regs are exactly. So naturally, a lot of people come to Alaska, the lure is to catch, the big barn door halibut, right? And historically, before halibut resource dwindled so far down, everybody would always advertise, oh, this is where you catch big barn door halibut, even though where they fish, there aren't any damn big halibut anyway, but they all say that. So hopefully to answer your question is, we convert my own commercial fishing IFQ and some that we bought and or leased from others, and we can take whatever the number is, it changes by the year, like 70 pounds of IFQ, and turn it into the right to keep any single halibut. If you trade in 70 pounds or 56 pounds of IFQ, any halibut that you want, any size. So you come up to Alaska, you catch, oh my God, it's 200 pounds. Can they keep it? No, because it has to be over 72 inches, which is 230 pounds. We'll bring it aboard, measure it, it's a half an inch too short, like let it go. But if you say, yeah, pay us $700 and you can keep that fish no matter what size it is. To measure it? Good question, because you're not supposed to put a gaff in it at all, right? It's got a big circle hook in its mouth. Shoot it and release it. Yeah, that's what we, as charter guys, we don't care. We kill them all. Yeah. Well, first of all, we get pretty good eye, and because lots and lots and lots of lodges say they have guided angler fish, which is these commercial fishing rights converted into charter fishing rights. And they'll buy 2 or 3 and they say they've got them. And they might have 4 guests a year. So they're just using it as a gimmick to get people there. But we actually probably, and in fact, we've looked at this statewide, the release numbers. And to your point, Basha, they won't tell you what lodges buy this much, but we ended up in all of Southeast Alaska, we're like using 20% of all the guided anglerfish. It's one lodge because I'm all commercial fished. I got IFQs. I've been doing it forever and a day. So anyway, we do this thing and it puts big halibut on our website, and we're constantly accused of, ruining the resource. So the question is, Ian, and I'm really confused now because you always hear about, oh, these big 100-pound, 200-pound halibut, they have exponentially more eggs than, a 25-pound female. And like, well, I've dressed lots and lots of halibut, and yeah, there seems to be more proportional to body size, but if I'm understanding, some of the eggs are smaller, but they're still as viable as a bigger individual egg. And so the question becomes, they're not exactly related to body mass. Is that right? So 250-pound halibut have the same amount of eggs as one 100-pound halibut, which would make sense to me. But my point to people is usually a 200-pound halibut could be about 40 years old or 50 years old. It takes time to grow there. They don't all grow the same rate. But you get these 25-pound, 30-pound halibut, they're all females, anything over like 25, 30 pounds, right? They're all females. That's going to be producing eggs for 30 more years. So what do you want? This 200-pound fish, 300-pound fish is going to produce eggs for 5 years that has 200 pounds, 50 pounds, 4 times more eggs, but it's going to produce eggs for 20 more years. So how are we raping these resource? And if you knew for a fact that if we were all to release big halibut, you're laughing, that would help, we would do that. And I'd be the first one to say, yeah, let's do it. Anyway, so I don't know that I answered your question.
No, that's where I was going.
Yeah.
That's actually what I was going on.
Yeah.
That is,
Yeah.
if a regulatory part of the Halibut Commission is using the assumption that the big ones produce more eggs, is there a way for the Research Advisory Board to negate that myth and say, okay, they're using an assumption opposed to scientific data, and maybe funding come back to the Research Advisory Board from the other entities to prove or disprove that theory, so that your regulatory part is actually based on science opposed to an assumption, I guess.
So a couple things. One is that's exactly the question that we're answering with this study. Rather than speculate on this, we're doing the science to figure it out. So we won't know about egg quality right away, but we will know about egg quantity and whether a big fish produces proportionally more eggs than a small fish. And that's the key, because a big fish produces an exponentially larger number of eggs because weight goes up exponentially with length. So that we know that. On some of your other questions, we have been asked several times in the most recent, actually maybe it was 2 size limit analyses ago, they also asked for us to evaluate a maximum size limit. And what would there be a benefit of releasing large females in order to protect that component of the spawning stock? And a couple things we came up with right away. One, well, we need some clear scientific information on the egg output of those big females. It's speculation until we have the science to back it up. But 2, as you noted, the vast majority of the spawning biomass is not those giant females. If you think about it in terms of the percent of the pounds in the water, most of your spawning is going to come from a small to middle-sized female, especially now with low size at age. So if you're counting on only those few big females to get you through, you're probably in trouble already. Like, you need to be benefiting from the bulk of the population. And that's actually what we found, was that in order to actually protect an appreciable component of the stock, you'd have to be discarding fish like 80 pounds and up in order to have a real impact on the spawning stock. And then there's a tipping point. So the tipping point is when you catch and release a fish, not all of them survive. It differs by rec and commercial and how you caught it and how you treated it and all sorts of things. But the reality is not every fish that's captured survives. And if you think about a person going out to catch 10,000 pounds of quota, if they keep the first 10,000 pounds they catch, they killed 10,000 pounds of fish. If they catch 1,000 pounds of big females while they're doing that, and half of them die, they killed 10,500 pounds of fish. And you need to make sure that extra 500 pounds of mortality was worth it. for the spawning biomass. And that's what we can't say unless we have data saying, hey, look at the egg count on these big females. So this is exactly this study is a laser beam on that particular question to tell us whether or not we need to be thinking down that path or not. And it's always going to be that trade-off between how many you kill to release and what the benefit of those fish are. And it totally depends on the ratio of your discard mortality rate to the proportion of reproductive output of those big females. And I think we have a reasonable idea about discard mortality rates, and they are probably lower for the big fish on average because they're not a 16-knot hook doesn't go as deep into their eyes and the rest of their head, and they're probably either going to pull out at the water line or they're going to be released. Halibut are tough; they can survive some pretty bad injuries. I think some of the work that Claude's done suggests that especially sublegal fish probably have a higher discard mortality rate than larger fish. So we know a little bit about discard mortality rate, but the big uncertainty is in the reproductive output of those big fish. And so that's why we're doing this study, to be able to try to answer that question. But to get back to the bigger question, we get asked all the time, and I know that people do get creamed on the internet for killing a big fish once in a while. And our response to that is we don't have any information that that's a bad thing right now. In fact, if you're minimizing your footprint in the fishery, especially in a commercial fishery where you're fishing to a quota, if you're releasing big fish, you could be killing more fish to fill that same quota. It's a little bit different maybe in a recreational fishery because you have a little more control over how many fish you encounter and interact with in a day. But there's still probably something there, which is that if you're releasing a lot of fish, you're going to kill some of those fish, and you might have a bigger footprint than if you had just kept the fish that you caught, like that one big one. So without the science, it's hard to say definitively that there isn't a contribution of those big fish. But right now, we're on people's side when somebody kills a fish and puts a picture up. We say, hey, that's exactly what we expected you to do. We don't have a problem with that.
And Lando, I think you asked, how do you get a big fish like that on board and measure it? Well, it's illegal to put a gaff in a fish like that. Yeah, you cannot gaff a halibut in the charter fishing industry unless you intend to keep that halibut. So we have doors that open up. You have to pull them up over a rail, and they're mostly at the water line. The boat rolls like this, and you can pull them aboard, and I have. There are some people probably that stick a gaff in the underside of the lip and pull on the line. There's some people try to put lines on them and stuff. There might be some. If you're, when I'm commercial fishing and they're off, and you're pulling them up fast and all that, and they're thrashing like crazy, you don't stop. You just keep going, and there's that fish. No, I know you're not, but I just wanted to let you know. So, but when you're fishing with a hook and they're thrashing and stuff, you just keep them under the surface, and you keep your head under the water, and you slow down, take all your time in the world to quit thrashing. Then you get them up, you look at them. They say take a tape measure and put it in the water and this kind of stupid stuff. Like, I think it's a problem to kind of, in a way, to argue against my whole industry. Like to say you could keep a halibut over this length and to get it aboard without hurting it might be kind of hard, especially if, but you're not supposed to gaff it. And I imagine we don't do it. If they do, I would like fire people. I would tell them if I heard about it. But we don't gaff them in the head and kill a big halibut because it's a half inch too short. Well, so let it go. We just don't. No, doesn't mean somebody might not do it without my knowledge because they do illegal shit sometimes. Yeah. But that's why I don't like salmon derbies. Yeah, that's because of 37 versus 39. Like, what's the point? But then they've done the mortality test for charter fishing, and it's really low anyway, because they're all fresh. They haven't been fighting hook for 6 hours. But you cut me off, Claude. Okay, it's okay. It's okay if you do. Somebody stop.
So just a point about why can't you just, when you do the studies on do they produce more eggs, why can't you determine if they're viable eggs then or skip spawning then and all in one big friggin' deal, or is it the scientific parameters different for every one of those?
I can address this. I can address the skip spawning a little bit. So really, there's two ways to go about skip spawning, and we've had internal discussions about this. So one is that histologically, you can see on the cross sections of the ovary what's called atresia, and that's basically breakdown of the cellular structure of the eggs, right? And so there's a lot of research out there, depending on various levels of atretic cells that they see, they'll indicate that that is a skip spawner, whether that's 25% atretic cells, 50%, whatnot. You can also use that information on the fecundity side of things, which is what we're kind of leaning more towards, because let's say you have 25% atresia in a sample, and you're assuming that's a skip spawner, then that turns that fish from a 1 mature to a 0, according to the stock assessment, right? So it's basically it's a non-spawner. But if you move that question towards fecundity, you could say that, well, this fish is showing maybe 10% atretic cells. So maybe when that fish spawns, it's maybe a 90% output rather than a full output, right? And so those are the two types of ways that you can basically address skip spawning. And so histologically, we can go back through all of our slides and we can generate a proportion of atretic cells that we see in the sample and say that, that fish is showing potentially early signs of atresia, or could have potential, what they call mass atresia, which is basically just like total abortion, basically aborting, like abort spawning, basically, or development of the eggs, and basically reabsorption to potentially spawn the next year, right? So that kind of addresses the skip spawning aspect of things. And so it's something that we haven't used as a tool yet. The information right now, basically what we're assuming for the maturity estimates is that if we see signs of oocyte development, or basically what we call vitellogenesis, which is the early development of oil globules in the oocyte, once it hits that stage, we're assuming that female is going to progress into a spawning capable individual. And that's what we're using for our maturity estimates. Now, the atresia side of things is where we can use that towards like each fish's individual output for that given year. And that's how we can use that information.
Gathering now, you're going to be able to reuse to determine different skip spawning or viability or the number of eggs per pound.
Yeah, we have all this information. Also, another cool aspect of the autodiametric method that we're going to be using is that each individual fish that we have a sample from, we're going to be collecting oocyte diameter measurements for every fish. So we'll have a historical time series of egg size. So it might not be that potentially the bigger females aren't producing more eggs. Maybe they're producing slightly bigger eggs than a smaller female, and end up trying to figure out what kind of impact that could end up having on, survivorship and those types of things, and the egg quality aspect of it.
Bigger eggs mean bigger fish?
Not necessarily.
I think our preliminary data shows that there's really no difference, but we'll find out for sure.
We'll have a bigger. We have some initial information on that on our first histology study that Teresa Fish did in the Central Gulf of Alaska. Didn't show much difference between size of the fish, but this new fecundity estimate will give us a much broader, bigger data set as far as the size of the individual that the samples were collected from.
You mentioned that the females are maturing at a younger age. Is that possibly show a stress on the stock, and that's the reason that they're maturing so much younger. And second part of that is, I've mentioned it before, but how much have you guys thought about studying how much temperature affects the sex ratio in the stock? And at temperature, and maybe this younger maturity at age is indicative of the stock being in trouble.
Yeah, the temperature question is a great one. It was brought up by our SRB, I think last year. I think they maybe brought up a request or recommendation looking at our now historical time series that we have on our visual estimates now, and seeing if there's any potential environmental factors that could be driving that. And then as far as, there has been a lot of studies that have shown that, large fishing pressure has reduced maturity and aging of maturity in fish stocks worldwide. But I don't know if Ian wants to maybe talk a little bit about spawning stock biomass and potential impacts, but I know he's going to be bringing up a lot of that at the interim meeting.
Yeah, I mean, it could be a sign of some stress on the stock. It could also be a sign that that's what we have in the water right now is younger fish. We don't have a lot of older fish. And it's hard to interpret on its own, because that's exactly how fish stocks, that's exactly how surplus productivity gets made, is that you fish, the stock shifts a little bit and becomes more productive with what's still in the water, thereby, producing more yield available. There are lots of examples around the world where you fish hard on a stock and the maturity schedule accelerates to the point where you're still getting spawning and still getting reproduction, even though you may have caught a lot of the fish that would have been the spawners if you hadn't been fishing on them. So it could be an indication of stress on the stock, but it's not necessarily the wrong response or a bad response. It's just something that we do see in marine fish. But the one thing to remember is that the calibrated data is a 20-year time period, but we only have 3 years right now of the histology. And we really need some more years before I think we can say a lot about the temporal patterns. I mean, that we just saw some shift back and forth, but that could just be that things shift back and forth over time. A couple of years to the right, a couple of years to the left, that could be totally normal for this stock over a 100-year period. We obviously won't know until we have multiple years of monitoring data.
Would have been interesting to see the same study happen back in the late 70s and early 80s, because I fished that period of time.
Dr. Stewart, you mentioned that
It'd be really
the temporal
fascinating.
patterns. Is this just since the advent of the CCADs that are launching for the fish? Are there temperature studies prior to these CCADs?
We would have access to, well, the thing about the CCATs is it's exactly the temperature that was going on at this location. But for halibut, that fish has experienced a whole range of temperatures over its lifetime in the place you caught it, maybe, or maybe somewhere totally different. So we may have better luck actually just looking at kind of basin-wide, Gulf of Alaska, Bering Sea temperature patterns. And there are some longer records for that. So we can there's lots of sources for that information. Exactly. And the trawl surveys, like the trawl survey in the Bering Sea, has been collecting temperature since 1981, I think. So there's a lot of sources of broad temperature information. The real challenge for halibut is we don't know exactly where that fish has been. So it could have been, you catch it in a warm place, it doesn't mean it grew up there, it spent its whole life there. And similarly, for a cold place. So that's something I think we're really gonna have to think about, how we recreate the life experience of a fish and try to relate that to where it is in terms of any of these biological characteristics.
We see that just in the course of a year, with the migration from the deep to the shallow and back and forth. That's all temperature. I'm assuming it's temperature related and feed related and everything. It seems to interrelate with salmon migrations too. So.
Yeah, that CCAT data seems pretty valuable, but do you publish that anywhere on your website? You do? Okay,
Yeah, it's on the
look hard
website.
enough.
Yeah, you can find it under the data tab.
Any questions for those online? No, if not, well, what I would suggest. We break for lunch now at, now it's, I think that clock's, it's a little further. It's, in my clock, it's 12:40. Why don't we break for lunch until 1:30 and we come back at 1:30?